Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. Tonight, I will guide you into a world of darkness, hoping to help you relax and unwind. Perhaps some of you will even drift into a haunting yet soothing sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And now, we begin. I always thought ghost stories were just made-up nonsense by people who had too much time on their hands. But there are certain things you experience that you can't explain away, no matter how hard you try to laugh or cry them off. Back in 2007, I was in my early 20s and went to spend a few weeks at my uncle's place in rural New Mexico. It was one of those tiny desert towns where everybody knows everyone else's business. And as you'd expect, once the sun went down, there wasn't much to do except sit around telling strange stories to pass the time. It was during one of these conversations that I first heard about the so-called roofless church. They said that deep in the desert, way out where even the glow from town couldn't reach, there was an old ruin hidden among the sagebrush where soul weddings took place. It sounded like something from one of those alternative theater groups. You know, those weird rituals put on for tourists. But the way people talked about it wasn't like they were joking around. I got curious. I was young, head full of courage and empty of good sense. I didn't think twice when they invited me to go see it for myself. In my mind, it was just going to be another weird night, one of those stories you tell later. But man, was I wrong about that. What really convinced me was the way my Aunt Martha talked about the church. She lowered her voice, looked around like someone might be listening, and said that nobody from town went anywhere near that place. Not even as a joke, not even to pray. They said it was cursed ground, land that belonged to lost souls. You know that feeling when you realize you probably shouldn't even be hearing about something. That's exactly what it was like, but I was stubborn. That night we drove as far as we could down this dirt road full of potholes and washouts. Then, we had to hike the rest of the way on this barely there trail through thick brush and cacti, with these huge desert moths crossing our path. The strangest thing was that even though there wasn't any wind, the brush seemed to move on its own, like it knew we were coming. I know it sounds crazy, but nobody was talking. Everyone just kept their eyes forward, walking fast like they didn't want to think too much about what we were doing. When we finally got there, I understood why people were scared. The church wasn't just some old ruin. It was like a hole of silence carved out of the desert. Only the broken walls remained, everything covered in dried vines and desert moss. There were melted candles scattered across the packed dirt floor, and roots growing up through the earth like fingers trying to grab onto something. Right there at the sunken altar, there was a large clay basin sitting in the middle of a circle of candles. It looked like someone had set everything up just hours before, but there wasn't a soul around. At least, that's what we thought. The weirdest part was that as soon as we stepped inside that church space, the whole atmosphere changed. I can't explain it right, but it was like the energy of that place got heavy, more dense. Every step made this weird, muffled sound, like the ground was hollow underneath. It felt like the earth was hiding something beneath our feet. But here's the thing, the closer we got to the altar, the stronger this smell became. It was sweet, but rotten at the same time, like fruit left to spoil in the heat. And even though there were all these unlit candles scattered around, there was no sign of anyone nearby. No sounds of animals, no crickets, No coyotes, nothing. Just the sound of our footsteps, and occasionally the wind making the candles flicker like they might light themselves. At one point, I swear I heard something dragging behind the broken wall. But when I turned to look, there was nothing but shadows. The truth is, even without anything actually happening yet, I already wanted to run. There was something wrong with that place. It wasn't just an old ruin. It was like the thing was still alive somehow. But we stayed because, at that point, you could still fool yourself into thinking it was just stupid fear. The strangest part was when the couple appeared. I swear they didn't come walking down the trail or anything. They were just suddenly there, standing in the middle of the church like they'd always been there. A man and a woman facing each other, wearing these weird old-fashioned clothes, all stained and dirty. Dark veils covering both their faces. The worst part was that nobody seemed surprised. It was like the people I was with were expecting this to happen. Only me standing there frozen, trying to figure out where the hell they'd come from. The ceremony started without anyone saying a word. They approached the clay basin on the ground, and without hesitating, each one pulled out a rusty blade from their pocket. But here's the thing, they weren't shaking, weren't hesitating. It was like they'd done this 1,000 times before. They cut their own palms and let the blood drip straight into the black water in the basin. The bizarre thing was that the blood didn't mix. It just floated there, forming these strange shapes, faces, hands, even what looked like a mouth opening. That's when I started feeling the ground vibrate, real subtle, like a muffled growl coming from deep in the earth. It felt like the church was cursed or something. My heart was already beating so hard I could barely hear anything else. For a second, I thought about just getting out of there, turning around and disappearing into the desert. But it was like something was holding me by the ankle, telling me that if I ran, it would be worse. But the worst was still to come, because right when they joined hands, still bleeding, the water in the basin started boiling out of nowhere. No fire, nothing underneath. The bubbles rose fast, making this muffled sound like when you try to talk underwater. The most bizarre thing was that with each bubble that popped, you could see these little faces trying to get out, like there were people trapped inside. My body went weak, my head started spinning, and the ground was really shaking now, like something huge was moving underneath, pushing at the earth gently, waiting for its moment to come out. The strange thing was that nobody around me seemed scared. Everyone was staring at the altar, motionless, like they were hypnotized. Or worse, like they were expecting this to happen. I could only think about running, but it felt like my legs had forgotten how to work. That's when the shadow appeared. A huge figure, bigger than any person I'd ever seen, covered in a black veil all torn up. It floated right above the couple. And the strangest thing was that the veil didn't just cover the face. It seemed to cover the air around it, like black smoke that sucked up all the light. You couldn't see what was underneath, but you could feel it. And I felt that it wasn't human. The moment that thing passed right over us, I felt such a strong pressure in my chest that I thought I was going to pass out standing up. It was like something was pulling my spirit away, like I'd become light and heavy at the same time. And worse, when I looked to the side, expecting to see the people who came with me, there was nobody there. For real. I was standing there alone in the middle of the broken church, not a living soul around. That's when I ran. I ran without thinking, stumbling through the dirt with the scattered candles going out behind me on their own. The strangest thing was that while I was running, the sound of the desert seemed to get farther and farther away, like the world had stretched out, and I was trapped in a piece of it that didn't want to let me go. But here's the detail. When I finally got out of the trail and reached the road back, everything was normal. Clear sky, not a cloud anywhere, like nothing had happened. I made my way back to my aunt's house however I could, with shaky legs and my head spinning. And when I got there, my friends were on the porch, sitting around laughing and talking like they'd never left. The worst part was that when I asked them, they swore I'd gone to the church alone. They said I'd become obsessed with it, and that they'd seen me leave by myself the night before. That nobody had ever agreed to go with me, that I'd made up this whole story about soul weddings. It sounds crazy, but to this day I don't know what's worse, having lived through that, or coming back thinking I was with people when maybe I never was. I know it sounds insane, and to this day I keep trying to find an explanation that makes sense. Sometimes I think maybe I dreamed it, maybe I had some kind of breakdown. But the strange thing is that I remember every detail. The most bizarre part is that nobody ever talked about the church again. Not my uncles, not the people in town. It's like the place had disappeared, like it had been swallowed by the desert again. I asked once about the trail, and they looked at me like I was asking about a place that never existed. And since then, I've never tried to go back there. I needed to share this because honestly, I don't know what else to do. Has anyone else been through something like this? Something that chose you and won't let you forget. If anyone has felt this or lived through something similar, please tell me. Sometimes the worst part isn't what you saw, it's what stays with you. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let's continue. I never used to believe in ghost stories that older folks tell. You know how it is in rural Kentucky. Every little noise becomes a lost spirit. Every strange wind is already a sign to start praying hard. I always took it all as a joke, until the day the thing turned on me. It was 2010. I just come back to the little town where I grew up because we needed to clean out my great-grandmother's house. She'd passed away a few months earlier, and the place was in that state, dusty, smelling of mildew, full of heavy furniture that seemed glued to the floor. We were opening closets, pulling out old junk, throwing stuff away. It was during one of these cleanouts that I found it. There was a wardrobe pushed against a wall in the back hallway. When we moved it, a small, crooked door appeared that I'd never seen before. It looked like it led to some kind of attic or storage room. The wood was damp, the handle cold despite the heat outside. Being curious like I am, I was the first one who wanted to open it. I swear to you, I really wish I'd left that door closed. The strange thing is that I grew up in that house. I used to spend vacations there every year since I was a kid. I knew every corner, every crooked wall, every broken shingle. But I swear I'd never seen that door before. None of my uncles remembered it either. It was like it had been there the whole time, hidden behind that heavy wardrobe, like someone had pushed it there on purpose to cover it up. The most bizarre thing was that the house always had this smell, you know. That smell of old things mixed with burnt candles. We thought it was normal. It was great-grandma's house. She always had a bunch of herbs hanging on the porch, saints scattered around the corners, a clay bowl with water by the front door that nobody touched. Those things that everyone sees and doesn't question because they're just part of small-town life. My great-grandmother was one of those women who blessed children with the evil eye, made charms to ward off bad luck. Those things. But even so, she never talked much about what she knew. Whenever anyone asked, she'd give a little laugh and change the subject. And me, I never thought much about it until that day. The strangest thing was that when I put my hand on the handle of that hidden door, I felt a chill that went straight up the back of my neck. It wasn't ghost fear. It was like a warning, something in my body telling me not to open it. But I was stubborn and curious, way too curious. As soon as I pushed the door open, this hot breath hit my face, like the place had been storing its own air for decades. It was a heavy smell, mixed with mildew, melted wax, and something sour I couldn't quite explain. But there was more. There was also a sweet smell, real faint, like old flowers. You know that cemetery flower smell that hangs in the air after a long time. I went up slowly, each step on that rotten wooden staircase creaking, thinking it was going to collapse any second. The attic was cramped with a low ceiling, full of torn boxes, moldy clothes hanging on broken hangers, some old photos thrown in a corner. Nothing I hadn't seen in old houses before, to be honest. But there was one detail that got me suspicious. In the middle of all that mess, it looked like the floor had marks, like someone had dragged something heavy from there recently. The dust was disturbed. There were fingerprints in the dirt, like someone had been messing around up there very recently. And the worst part, way in the back of the attic, under a dirty cloth that looked like an old shroud, I saw a glint. A thick glass jar, opaque from dust, but still shining like it was calling out. I don't know why, but my heart started racing. It was like my head was telling me to get out of there, but my body was being pulled, you know. I had to see what it was. The strangest thing was that the closer I got, the stronger that sweet smell became. When I got closer to that glow, I saw it was a jar, a thick, heavy glass jar, sealed with black wax all cracked up. It didn't look like it had been forgotten there. It looked like someone had placed it there with all the care in the world, like hiding a secret that couldn't be found. Even without touching it, I could already see what was inside. They were ears. Human ears, dried up, wrinkled, shriveled like autumn leaves. Some still had children's earrings hanging from them, you know, those little gold hoops. It looked like a scene from a horror movie, but it was real. It was right there in front of me. And worse, under the jar, there was a bunch of yellowed pieces of paper, all tied up with straw ribbon. Each paper had a name written by hand in shaky handwriting, like someone who was very scared or angry. Almost all the names were crossed out with thick charcoal, like someone wanted to erase them from the world. The truth is, at that moment I froze. I stood there looking at that thing, and part of me was screaming to drop everything and run. But another part seemed like I needed to understand what that was. It felt like I'd found something that was never supposed to be seen. And deep down, real deep down, I already felt like I wasn't going to be able to just pretend nothing happened. After I came down from the attic and locked that door again, it felt like something had stuck to me. Like I'd carried that smell, that heavy feeling, like the whole attic had come down with me. I remember that same night, even locking the door, even trying to distract myself with cleaning the house. I couldn't stop thinking about the jar. It was like it was up there calling me somehow, in a way I can't explain. And worse, when it got completely dark, the house felt different. First, it was that heavy silence, different from the normal silence of old houses. It was a silence that seemed to listen to you, that seemed to wait for something. Then the whispers started, real faint from far away, like children playing in the backyard. I tried to ignore it, blamed it on tiredness, but the truth was it was coming from inside the house. In the middle of the night, I started hearing footsteps in the hallway. Light, short, quick steps, like a child running in socks. I'd stay still in bed, holding my breath, hoping it was just my head playing tricks. But then when the mattress sank next to me, like someone small had sat down there, I knew it wasn't in my head. But there's one detail that really made me freeze. I heard my name, real quiet, drawn out, just the way great-grandma used to call me when I was a kid. But it was a child's voice, a voice that shouldn't have been there. The truth is, no matter how much I tried to stay still, pretend I was sleeping, every part of my body knew there was something there with me. Something small, insistent, that wanted to play. The next day I couldn't take it. I went straight to the town's healer, that lady everyone respected but nobody really liked visiting. She was short, soft-spoken, seemed fragile, but when she looked at me, it was like she could see everything I'd done, everything I'd touched. The strangest thing was that I didn't even need to explain much. When I said, I found something in my great-grandmother's house, she already frowned and told me to sit down. She explained that it was old stuff, old witchcraft to trap small souls. That those ears weren't just body parts, they were contracts. A way for the person who did the spell to keep the child trapped forever, serving them from the other side. But there's one detail that gave me chills down to the roots of my hair. She said that whoever finds a jar like that doesn't find it by accident. That if I'd found it, it's because my name was already on the list. That somehow, the jar was already waiting for me. Right then, my stomach turned. The healer gave me some instructions I'll never forget. I had to bury the jar at the oldest crossroads in town, tie a red ribbon to a dry branch, and above all, not look back. No matter what I heard, no matter what I felt, I wasn't supposed to look. And the worst part, the night I chose to do this, there was a full moon. Even though I was scared to death, I knew I couldn't put it off. I took the jar and wrapped it in an old cloth just like the healer told me, and walked to the oldest crossroads in town, which was past the old cemetery where they hadn't done burials in years. The whole way felt wrong. You know when the wind stops blowing and even the crickets disappear? That's what it was like. Not even dogs were barking, not even leaves were moving. It was like the world was holding its breath, waiting to see if I'd have the courage. When I got to the middle of those 3 dirt roads, that's when I felt it. It was like there was a bunch of children surrounding me. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel a chill that started at my ankles and went up to the back of my neck. I buried the jar in the middle of the crossroads, quick like she'd told me, and tied the red ribbon to the first dry branch I found. But here's the detail. As soon as I finished tying the ribbon, I heard laughter. Little giggles, low ones, running around me like the children had made a circle around me. You could hear the little steps in the dirt, several of them, light, hurried, like they were getting closer, like they were just waiting for me to turn around to look. But I didn't turn around. I gathered all the strength I had, kept my head down, and started walking back with my heart almost jumping out of my mouth. I could feel those presences following behind, brushing against my legs, tugging gently at the hem of my pants like children wanting to play. And with every step, the urge to look back got stronger. But I just kept thinking about the healer's voice saying, "Don't look no matter what." When I finally got home, the silence was different. It was different. It wasn't that heavy, muffled silence anymore. It was real silence, you know. The silence of an empty house, of a place where nobody's watching you in the dark. That night I slept for the first time since it all started. No whispers, no footsteps running in the hallway, no mattress sinking next to me. It was like everything had gone back to normal. But there's one detail I could never forget. Sometimes, when the night's real cold and the porch light flickers for a second, I feel a little warm hand hold mine, gently, like someone asking to play again. It doesn't hurt, doesn't scare me. It's just there. And the truth is, I don't pull my hand away. I just stand still, take a deep breath, and let it be. I never heard footsteps again, never saw shadows again, never found another jar. But once in a while, when I'm distracted, I feel like there's someone next to me. Small, quiet, and waiting. Now I keep wondering, was it me who buried the jar? Or was it them who let me stay? Have you ever found something old that seemed to be waiting just for you? Tell me. Sometimes that's how it starts. I never thought I'd be sharing something like this, but I'm still losing sleep over what I saw on that road. It might sound crazy to people who live in big cities, but anyone who grew up in small places knows. There are things you can't explain, and you shouldn't try to. This happened in 2005, between Tucson and Phoenix, out in the Arizona desert. I was young, had just gotten my first job as a helper on a produce truck. We used to make deliveries before dawn to catch the farmer's market while it was still cool. Everything was going fine until they decided to change the route to cut time, taking this dirt road that locals around here avoid to this day. But we didn't know the story back then. We didn't know about the old man or the buried horn thing. It was on one of those pre-dawn runs, with the moon just a thin sliver in the sky, that I saw something I could never forget. The road was one of those that anyone who knows the desert understands. Cracked ground, fine dust, rising when you pass. Paulo verde and mesquite growing, crooked on the sides, like even the plants were afraid to get too close to the middle of the road. We were going slow because the truck was heavy, and every pothole felt like it was going to swallow the whole wheel. I remember that night the air was dry in a strange way, stiller than usual, and it seemed like even the coyotes had disappeared from the washes. My boss, Mr. Henderson, was one of those old-school guys who respected the desert, you know. He always kept a little sage bundle hanging from the rearview mirror, said it was to cut through bad energy, and that you should never cross a crossroads without making the sign of the cross. I used to laugh at that stuff in my innocence until that night. Until I saw that there are crossroads you should turn around from and not look back. The first strange thing was the smell. It wasn't the smell of sagebrush or wet earth like sometimes happens after rain. It was a smell that was kind of sour, kind of hot, like something was rotting nearby, even though the ground was dry as a bone. I smelled it first, but kept quiet, thinking it was just in my head, until I saw that Mr. Henderson was getting uncomfortable too, wiping his nose with his shirt sleeve and looking around. That's when I noticed something that made me freeze. At the crossroads where we were going to pass, right in the middle of the dust, there was something stuck in the ground. From far away, it looked like a dry branch, but it didn't move even with the weak wind that was blowing. It was long, kind of twisted, and it looked, I know this is going to sound strange, but it looked like a piece of horn, dirty with clay driven hard into the cracked ground. Mr. Henderson told me to turn off the headlights and speed up, but the moment the light passed over the horn, I swear it looked like there was smoke coming up from under the earth. After we passed that crossroads, it felt like the whole world had changed in a way I can't explain right, even today. The truck engine that had been running steady until then started failing out of nowhere, like it was choking even though there were no holes or rocks in the road. Mr. Henderson got pissed, slammed his hand on the dashboard, told me to stay alert. But it was like the truck was too heavy to keep going, like something was pulling it backward. The headlight, which was already weak because of the rough road, flickered a couple times and then got kind of yellow, like the light was sick. That's when I saw it. On the side of the road, real close to the dry brush, there was someone standing. At first I thought it was a big animal, like a stray dog or even a lost cow, but when the headlight flickered again, I saw better. It was a person. An old man, thin as a scarecrow, with a bundle of cloth in his hand, kneeling on the hard ground, pressed against the earth like he was praying to something. But the worst part wasn't that. The worst part was seeing that he was praying facing the stuck horn. Mr. Henderson told me to keep going, said not to even look. But it was like my body had locked up, like something was forcing me to stare. The old man was so close to the road I could see he was muttering something, but it wasn't church prayer. It wasn't normal talking either. It was jumbled, drawn out, kind of sung, like it was in Hebrew or something like that. And there was more. When the headlight hit him straight on, I saw that the old man's forehead wasn't normal. It was swollen, torn, looked like something was pushing from the inside out. There were black thorns growing from the flesh, like his head was sprouting rotten roots. I tried to say something, to shout, I don't know, but my throat felt dry as the road. And before I could think of doing anything, the old man slowly raised his face and looked straight at me. His smile, I still remember that smile today. It wasn't human. It was like every broken tooth carried a piece of misery with it. Right then I squeezed my eyes shut hard, like that would erase what I'd seen. But the truck gave such a hard jolt that I hit my head on the door. When I opened my eyes again, the old man wasn't there anymore. Neither was the horn. Just a dark mark on the ground, like something had burned from the inside, and a smell of rotten things that stuck in our throats for hours. Mr. Henderson floored it as much as he could, even with the truck failing, and swore up and down that we'd never take that road again. Me, from the passenger seat, I could only look out the window, expecting to see that old man appear again, coming out of the brush, running after us, but he never showed up. But when we got to town, close to the market, everyone noticed something strange about me. A black thread, looking like a dry root, had stuck to my forehead, right above my eyebrow. It wouldn't come off with water or soap or scrubbing hard. And to this day, on nights when the moon's waning, I feel a sharp pain there, like something wants to sprout from inside. After that day, I never took that road again. Not by car, not by motorcycle, not on foot, not even as a joke. Mr. Henderson also quit the delivery job a few months later. Said it wasn't for him anymore, that he was going to raise goats, that it was safer. But the truth is, neither he nor I could forget what happened out there. People in town started talking, you know how they do. They said the road got cursed, that everyone who tries to take a shortcut through there regrets it. That the engine fails, the headlight goes out, and the person feels a shadow walking on the side of the road, watching, waiting. Some people swore they heard that jumbled prayer mixed in with the sound of the wind when they passed near those crossroads. Others said they saw, even from far away, a thin figure crouched down with something pointy sticking out of its forehead. And me, I learned not to doubt anything anymore. Every time the moon starts to disappear from the sky, I still feel that sharp pain in my forehead, like something's calling from inside, calling me to come back. Have you ever driven down a road that felt like it was waiting for you? Tell me. Sometimes that's how these things start. Being completely honest, I never paid much attention to small-town traditions. The Day of the Dead procession was always just one of those rituals people do to feel better, praying for forgotten souls, lighting candles, those things that deep down nobody really understands anyway. I only went because my mom insisted, and I don't know, it was the kind of thing everyone did in Tucson. If you didn't go, you'd be seen as the weird one. So in 2012, I went again. Candle in hand, dragging my feet down the wet dirt street with that smell of melted wax and damp ground rising up. I'll admit I even thought it was kind of beautiful at first. All those people walking in silence, just the sound of footsteps and quiet prayers echoing through the alleys. You know when you look around and think, okay, weird tradition, but it has its charm. That's exactly what it was like. But that night, something happened that even my disbelief couldn't ignore. Something that made me rethink whether certain things don't deserve more respect than jokes. I remember that night, I was thinking more about getting home than paying attention to the prayers. You know that feeling of let's just get this over with? That was it. The cemetery was about 3 blocks from downtown, and the whole walk was dirt roads with a few yellowish streetlights flickering. Nothing special, just that kind of creepy atmosphere normal for a small town at night. As we got closer to the cemetery gate, the group started acting different. I know it sounds like an exaggeration, but it felt like people started walking slower, like the air had gotten thicker. I tried to ignore it, thought it was just my imagination. Maybe some tiredness because the ground was slippery, and everyone was walking kind of dragged out. That's when I noticed something that left me a bit spooked. In the middle of the procession, up ahead, there was someone who wasn't holding a candle. I don't know how I noticed because it was all dark and full of shadows. But that silhouette was completely still in the middle of people who were walking. And the most bizarre thing was that it seemed like nobody but me was noticing. Right then I felt this strange discomfort, you know. Like something was out of place, but my brain was still trying to find an excuse. Maybe it was someone from the organization, some church worker, I don't know. I tried not to pay attention, just looked at the ground and kept following. But there's one detail I can't get out of my head. The way she was dressed wasn't procession clothes or normal clothes. It was a wedding dress. And it wasn't white, it was black. A faded black, kind of worn, like it had been buried and dug up after years. Her veil was long, torn at the edges, dragging across the dirt ground, picking up mud and dry leaves as she walked. I know it sounds like something from a movie, but I swear that's what I saw. And the worst part was that she wasn't holding any candle. While everyone had that flame trembling in their hands, lighting up their faces, she walked in the dark like she didn't even need to see where she was stepping. She seemed to float for real. Her feet barely touched the ground, or at least that's the impression I got. Even with so many people crowded in the street, she had like a space around her. Nobody bumped into her, nobody tripped over her. It was like there was an invisible ring around her. And without realizing it, people just stepped aside. And the bizarre thing was that nobody commented, nobody looked, nobody seemed to notice. Just me. And then I realized she was walking toward the cemetery too. But the way she moved wasn't normal. It wasn't someone going to pray for the dead. It was like she was going home. Out of nowhere, people started moving away from her, like opening up space without even realizing it. I swear it seemed involuntary, Like there was something in the air pushing everyone to the sides, real slow, without anybody saying anything. And the scariest part of all was that I went along too, even without wanting to. I don't know how to explain it, but at the time it felt like our bodies knew something our heads didn't want to accept. Me still trying to be skeptical, still trying to find some dumb excuse like, oh, they stumbled, it was a coincidence. But the most absurd thing was seeing three people, an elderly lady who walked with a cane, a little boy, and a guy who must have been about 20, just stop in the middle of the path. And that's when I realized they were looking straight at her. But they weren't blinking, weren't moving, weren't saying anything. They just stood there, staring like they'd forgotten they were alive, like they'd turned into statues. And the detail that froze my spine was that while everyone else was looking at the ground, at their candles, at the sky, whatever, these three were staring only at her. Like they were the only guests at a party that nobody else had been invited to. Right then I wanted to run, but my legs went stiff. I stood there in the middle of the procession with my candle shaking in my hand, looking without wanting to look, praying silently that I wouldn't end up making eye contact with her too. What creeped me out the most was that suddenly the three of them started walking. But it wasn't that normal walking we have when we're conscious, It was like they were being pulled, kind of stiff, kind of outside their own bodies, going toward the cemetery. Nobody reacted, nobody tried to stop them. It was like nobody could see what I was seeing, or worse, like everyone had accepted it as part of the night. I still stood there for a few seconds, trying to process, thinking maybe they were volunteers, some church performance, I don't know. But then came the most bizarre part. When they passed through the cemetery gate, I swear on everything sacred that I saw her veil lift a little, like there was a breeze just for her. And for a split second, I saw her face. And the detail that scared me was that it wasn't a normal face. What I saw there was myself. But not me alive. It was like my face dead, pale, swollen, with dark spots like someone who'd been buried for days. Her stare was empty, but at the same time it seemed like she was smiling, but without moving her mouth. Like her soul was laughing at me. Right then I froze. My whole body locked up, the candle fell from my hand and went out in the wet dirt. And even so, I couldn't move. I could only watch her disappear among the tombstones, taking those three with her. The truth is, to this day, I don't understand how I managed to look away in time. Maybe if I'd stared one more second, who knows what would have happened. What nobody could ever explain was what happened afterward. When the procession ended, close to 1 a.m, a lot of people had already left kind of quick, Normal people always pray a few Hail Marys there in front of the cemetery and head home, because nobody's crazy enough to hang around there after midnight. But the strangest thing was that year, the Mass didn't even end right. The priest seemed nervous, was sweating a lot, stuttering some words nobody understood right, and in the middle of the confusion, nobody saw the lady in the black veil anymore. Nobody saw the three who had followed her either. At first, everyone thought they'd gotten lost in the middle of the cemetery, or that they'd gone back early. Those things. But the truth is, to this day I don't understand how three people just disappear without anyone noticing, without noise, without screaming, without running around. They vanished like they'd never been there. And that's when I realized there was something even more wrong. The next day, when people went to check the cemetery to see if they could find any clues, they found 3 old graves opened up. Like someone had ripped the crosses from the ground and broken the headstones in half. But the most absurd thing was that these graves were already old, from people who died decades ago. And suddenly, they were empty. No coffin, no bones, nothing. That's what left me speechless. That's what still gives me chills just remembering it. I could have sworn it was nonsense, that it was something I made up in my head that night. But after seeing those opened graves, I couldn't pretend nothing had happened anymore. After that night, I just couldn't go to cemeteries anymore. Not for funerals, not for Day of the Dead, not for anything. And look, Tucson is small. Everyone knows everyone. Sometimes you can't even escape these things. But I found a way to make up excuses, travel, anything to not have to pass even near that street. And the most absurd thing was that nobody talked about the 3 who disappeared anymore. It was like they'd been erased from the town, you know. The families seemed resigned, like they accepted it as God's will, and that was it. No search, no serious investigation. They disappeared, became silence. The weirdest thing was that a few months later, rumors started. People saying they saw a woman walking the dirt roads at dawn, in a black dress, dragging a torn veil. And the worst part was that whenever someone said they'd crossed paths with her, some misfortune happened right after. There were cases of people who rolled their cars coming home. Kids who got sick out of nowhere. There was even a woman who disappeared in the woods and they never found her again. The truth is, to this day, I don't really understand what I saw that night. I just know that if it was just legend, it was a legend good enough to leave marks on the ground, to open old graves, and to pull living people out of the middle of a procession. And you know what? Sometimes I wonder if what I saw was the lady in black choosing her next companions. Maybe those 3 didn't disappear. Maybe they just accepted an invitation I was lucky enough to refuse. Have you ever seen something during a religious ceremony that made you question everything you thought you knew about life and death? Tell me. Because sometimes the line between the living and the dead is thinner than we want to believe. And if you ever find yourself in a Day of the Dead procession and see someone who doesn't belong, someone who walks without touching the ground, someone who seems to be going home instead of paying respects, turn around. Don't look back, and pray you're not on their list. Because some invitations, once accepted, don't let you return to the world of the living. When I was 21, I spent a summer in my dad's hometown, a sleepy little place called Pine Ridge, nestled in the hills of eastern Tennessee. Time moved slow there, but the stories, they spread like wildfire. One tale everyone whispered about was the ghost of the cave, an old man said to haunt a cavern up on Blackthorn Hill. Dressed in tattered Civil War-era clothes, he'd appear at the cave's mouth, floating, no legs, pointing inside without a word before vanishing. The old folks swore there was buried treasure in that cave, but most of us laughed it off as a tall tale. My friends and I, Tony, the fearless one, Armando, who had a beat-up dirt bike, Fabian, the nervous type, and me treated it like a joke. But one evening, Tony came back from visiting his aunt on the other side of the hill, his face pale as ash. He'd taken a shortcut past the cave, and there, under the fading light, he saw him, the old man floating at the entrance, pointing into the darkness. Tony didn't stop to look closer. He bolted for the nearest streetlight. That night, Tony had a dream so vivid he swore it was real. He saw the old man in the cave, burying something shiny while gunfire echoed around him. Then others found him, and it ended badly right there in the cave. The next morning, he told us everything, his voice shaking but excited. What if the old folks are right? What if there's gold up there? We were skeptical but curious. So we made a plan not to go at night, mind you, but in broad daylight, around 10 in the morning. We reached the cave by 10:30, the air thick with damp earth and mildew. Armed with flashlights, we ventured in, Tony leading like he knew the way. He said it felt familiar, like his dream was a map. Deep inside, he stopped at a spot and said, "Here." We grabbed a pickaxe and started digging, cracking through a thin layer of rock into loose dirt. After a few minutes, something glinted in the beam of my flashlight. We scraped away the soil and found them, 3 thin gold chains, delicate but real. We dug more, but that was it. Not a fortune, but enough to sell and split between us. Here's the strange part. After we took those chains, the ghost of the cave stopped appearing. The old folks noticed, too. The stories about him faded, like he'd finally gotten what he wanted. Coincidence? Maybe. But I still wonder if that old saying's true. Where there's a haunting, there's treasure. What do you think? At 20, after a rough patch with depression, I moved to my Aunt Lucy's place in a remote corner of southern Oregon, a tiny town called Clearwater, surrounded by pine-covered hills and dirt trails. A river ran through it, cold and clear, cutting the town in half. Aunt Lucy had back problems, so I helped with chores, including washing clothes by the river, like folks had done for generations. Every morning, before the sun got too hot, I'd haul a basket, soap, and a washboard to the riverbank. The sound of water over stones, the shade of towering firs, it was peaceful, grounding. For a while, it felt like I was healing. The first few weeks were uneventful. But about a month in, on a Wednesday morning at 6:20, I know because I wore a cheap wristwatch I'd take off before washing, something changed. The sun was just peeking over the hills, the air chilly with a thin mist hovering over the water. I knelt on a flat rock, the river lapping at my calves, scrubbing a quilt, when something caught my eye. Floating toward me, tangled around a smooth stone, was a braid, long, black and thick, like a woman's hair, tied with a rubber band. It drifted closer, then slipped away with the current. I brushed it off. Maybe someone's hair got caught in the river. Weird, but not impossible. The next day I went back, arriving just before 6, when the sky was still dim. The water was colder, biting my skin as I started washing. Then I felt something strange in my hands, hair, long and tangled, wrapped around my fingers. I yanked my hands out, shaking it off. my heart pounding. As I steadied myself, I saw them, two braids, one thick, one thinner, floating down the river toward me. I scrambled out, legs dripping, chest tight, and ran back to the house. I asked Aunt Lucy if any houses were right by the river. She said no. The nearest was a quarter-mile away. 3 days later, I forced myself to return. I had to know what was going on. It was 6 in the morning, the air thick with fog, smelling of wet pine and faint soap from the rocks. I set up my basket, soap, and clothes, kneeling carefully. As I dipped a shirt into the water, I froze. There, just below the surface, was a woman. Her hair, black and endless, floated like seaweed. Beneath it, her face, or what should have been a face, was a featureless pink blur, moving slightly, like she was watching me. My first thought was that someone had drowned, a local girl caught in the current. But then she reached up, combing her hair with slow, deliberate fingers. I screamed, fell back, and cracked my elbow on a rock. The water churned, like something was thrashing to break free. I ran, barefoot, leaving everything behind. When I told Aunt Lucy, she went quiet, then said the river had claimed lives before a few women, lost to the current. One, though, was never found, and some girls claimed to see her, just like I did. That faceless figure, her hair floating, is burned into my memory, as vivid today as it was then. I don't know who she was, but I know she wasn't just a ghost. She was something more, something that wanted to be seen. I've hesitated for years about telling this story. You're the first person I've dared to share it with. I know you don't judge here, but somehow you become paranoid when you live through something like what I'm about to tell you. This happened in 1995. I was 24 years old then, studying at Portland State University. I was already going through difficult times in my life. I worked part-time and studied in the evenings because my family was gone. All the family I had left on my father's side had moved to Canada. They had money. My father, unfortunately, died in a workplace accident. The company took responsibility, but even with all the money in the world, you can never replace a parent. I started working to pay for my school. I didn't want to lack for anything, even though I never really needed to worry about money. I had no siblings. I barely remember my mother past age 10. She left one day, abandoning my father and me. They never even got divorced. She simply disappeared, leaving us a note. So when I was left with my father, and then when he was gone, I was completely alone. Fortunately, I had friends in Portland where I lived at the time. I had a good circle of friends, and one of them, I'll call him Marcus, shared my taste for metal music. We listened to progressive rock, industrial, all sorts of genres in that realm. Because of this shared interest, one day after leaving the university where we both studied, he told me he wanted to introduce me to a group of friends he'd known from school for a while. I accepted. We walked toward one of the shops near the university, and it was a group of kids, 7 of us total, men and women. Yes, we all shared this musical taste, and as soon as he introduced me, they started asking about the bands I liked. I always carried patches and pins on my backpack, and we talked about concerts. This became another regular social circle for me. And among all these people who were always excellent to me, very relaxed people, about 3 weeks after meeting them, one of them, who I'll call Lisa, caught up with me outside my classroom as I was leaving. We started talking about the usual stuff, asking if I knew of any shows in the coming weeks. Since I didn't know of any, she told me she could invite me to one. She mentioned the band's name, which I honestly don't remember now. I didn't know them, but I said yes, asking if the others were going too. She said she'd prefer if just the two of us went first. Before I could ask why, she explained that she'd once tried to take the group to see this band, but a friend she'd brought didn't like it. She was sure the others would enjoy it, but since he didn't like it and spoke badly about that music, the others had already predisposed themselves to not liking it. I told her I loved the idea. I was comfortable with her because she'd never shown any romantic interest in me. She never gave me a single signal that she was interested, so I was fine with that. This was also helping me get through everything from that year. The show was going to be in 2 days, falling on a Saturday. She told me where we'd meet and asked me not to tell the others yet. She preferred that I go first and then tell her if I liked it so she could recommend it to the others, because she really wanted all of us to go together. That day arrived, and I saw her at night at 9 o'clock in front of the Portland Art Museum. She had arrived before me and told me we needed to walk a couple of blocks. I accompanied her, and we passed by the Cathedral Park area. I remember we arrived at a type of warehouse, something large that was about 1.5 blocks from the cathedral area. That whole zone becomes completely deserted at night. She knocked on the door of this warehouse. They opened it for us, and we entered. We walked through a hallway that seemed to be a small reception area. Everything had very dim lighting. Honestly, it didn't look like the place for a show of this type of music. It looked almost elegant, formal. When we passed the reception area, we entered the main area. This place still didn't look like somewhere a band would play. There were tables, lots of people, and looking at them, Lisa and I were the youngest ones there. They were dressed not quite formally, but nobody was dressed like us. I thought maybe this was where the event would be, but perhaps the people who had rented it before hadn't left yet. Maybe we were mistaken. Up front, where there was a stage, there wasn't a single instrument. There were only 3 podiums, some chairs, and a type of curtain. I still had the idea that we'd made a mistake. Maybe it wasn't what I thought, and then a woman and a man, both about 50 years old, approached us. They greeted Lisa with kisses and hugs. Upon seeing me, both smiling, they asked Lisa if I was her guest or part of it. I didn't know what the second option meant. What did part of it mean? Part of the staff or something like that? I turned to look at Lisa, and she stared at me for several seconds, very seriously. We stood there saying nothing until she responded, "Guest. He's my guest." The part didn't come. I was completely confused, and I heard the couple approaching me, extending their hands, saying, "So you're Michael, right? We're so sorry for your father's passing. Our deepest condolences. Whatever you need, don't hesitate to tell us or tell Lisa, and she'll let us know. Michael isn't my real name, I'll use that for this story, but they knew it. As far as I knew, Lisa didn't know about my father. Maybe Marcus had told the group, though I don't think so, but how else would they know? Nice to meet you." "Yes, thank you for your words," I replied, still confused. I had even forgotten about the concert. This couple left, and Lisa and I were alone. She asked me to accompany her. We were looking for a table, and I didn't have enough confidence to ask her what all this was, where we had gone. So I just stayed quiet. We sat at a table, and I had to take advantage of the moment to ask her about this before someone else arrived and overheard us. She just told me, "This group helped me a lot when, just like you, I was left alone here in Portland. My parents died in a collision with a truck driver, and a friend brought me here. They really helped me. I never lacked for anything after that. I know your father didn't leave you his position, but here they'll help you too. It's for the best, I assure you." That didn't calm me down at all. Now I didn't know what to ask. I looked everywhere, seeing the doors we had entered through, and they had closed them. There were 2 tall men at each door guarding them, and suddenly we were all seated. Up front at the podium, a man stood up, and I won't tell you everything he said that night. It was too much. It sounded similar to speeches given in churches, but they never mentioned anything about our Lord, about God, Jesus, any saint, nothing. They only referred to someone as her. That was all they said. That warehouse was very large. There were too many people there listening to this person. There were also other types of seats up front that were similar to church pews. Everyone listened to him. Then they mentioned something about a recess. Everyone started talking. I didn't know what to talk about with Lisa, as she wouldn't stop talking to other people who had sat with us at that table. So I didn't ask anything else, until they turned off all the lights, and up front, with several candles, moving the curtain, they began to bring forward a type of statue that must have measured between 10 and 13 feet tall, very detailed, of something I don't know what it was. I had never in my life seen anything like it. Look, in those years we had the stigma, well, a bit more than now, that people who listened to this type of music were satanic. Some did make an effort to project that image, so you knew all kinds of figures, but this was one I had never seen or heard of. Everything I'm telling you was completely real, even though I couldn't believe the type of figure it was. The statue looked more like some fictional character, but seeing how everyone venerated it, with people even crying, people applauding, taking bills from their purses and leaving them on the floor. This was a figure, and I'll try to get as close as possible to describing it. It was like the image of a tall woman, somewhat robust, but also combined with some type of reptile. I'm not just talking about the head, but parts of the body. It seemed to have hands, but also like crocodile feet. We were a bit far from this, but since it was so large, I could see perfectly that part of this thing had scales. It was all golden in color. I didn't know if it was pure paint or real gold. And that head, I don't know how to describe it, because even putting it into words, I can't capture the exactness to describe it. It was as if you mixed a woman's face with a flat face, but also that of a serpent with long hair, which did seem to be real. It was like that, but not exactly. It was very confusing. The people didn't help either. They were all acting crazy. They had removed the podium. There was no one else on that stage. They had only placed something like a table where several dishes would be served, and I don't know why I started feeling dizzy. I got scared. I was truly scared feeling like that in a place where I didn't know anyone except Lisa, and she wouldn't stop looking at this thing. I just sat down for a bit. I remember a man even approached me and patted my shoulder, telling me he had also felt so honored the first time he saw her, that it was normal to feel that way. I didn't know what to say to him. I just looked at him and took advantage of the fact that he was no longer looking at me to say nothing, continuing to try to recover. And Lisa, she wouldn't stop looking at that thing. Even though I'd only known her for 3 weeks and a few days, now she was completely different. She was mesmerized. What am I saying? Mesmerized. She was completely lost looking at this thing they had in front of them this size. I didn't want her to observe me. I just needed to exchange a few words with her to tell her I wanted to leave. This wasn't right. I didn't know where we were, what we were doing there, but she had moved a bit toward the front. Then another man approached me, a tall gentleman in a suit like many others there, gray-haired, very formal. "Young man, are you ready to change your life?" This man said to me, so I turned to look at him. I asked him what he meant by that, and he told me he knew very well what I had come for. He pulled me aside a bit, while everyone continued saying things I didn't understand and crying. Once aside, he told me I had come as a guest, right? That I was, and he said my name, my middle name, and my last names. Then he told me I was the son of, he said my father's name, and then told me I lived on such and such street, mentioning my exact address, the school where I studied, that my family had left some time ago. He also told me where I worked, that it was sad they had all left, but that they could now be my family. I was in shock. How did he know these things? Who told him? Of course, I quickly thought of my friend Marcus, who had introduced me to the other kids, to Lisa. However, he wouldn't be capable of doing something like this to me. I mean, he didn't know where I was. Why did we go there? Telling all that information to someone, he was one of my best friends. And if it wasn't him, how did he know all that? This gentleman laughed, not in a mocking way, I think, or at least not entirely, and told me that anyway, if they had brought me as a guest, I should think about it. That being one, I wouldn't want to be a part. That there was a reason they brought me that way. I still didn't have the slightest idea what they meant by part. I was afraid to ask this man, but if not, who would I ask? So I asked him what this part thing was, that yes, I was a guest, but it was my first day, playing into his game a bit so I wouldn't look so disoriented and be in danger somehow. Well, you see, the parts are about to come out. You'll realize it soon, and I'll leave you to it. Enjoy it, this is your new family. He told me his name and left somewhat hurriedly toward the front. And then I saw how they moved the statue a bit more forward to where that podium used to be. That thing with that shape now shared that space with that table, and a type of large fountain that soon lit up. And I truly hope that what I saw that day was something else, that it wasn't what I thought, because that fountain, instead of flowing water, was pure dark red liquid. And it wasn't just liquid, but along with everyone starting to scream excitedly and run toward the front, that whole place started to smell rotten, but horribly so. It smelled like decomposing meat and ammonia. I couldn't see Lisa anymore. She ran toward the front like the others. If everyone was acting crazy before, now they were even more so. In fact, I saw that the men who were near the door, who to me seemed to be guarding them, also ran toward the front. And I didn't care if anyone saw me. It seemed like they didn't. I would say I had to go to the bathroom, making up that I didn't know where they were in case they saw me trying to leave the building. I crossed through that door, taking advantage of the fact that there was no one around there anymore. I didn't want to stay to see what they were doing either. I left, reached the reception area that was completely empty with the lights off. Everything was very eerie, being there trying to get out while hearing everyone back there screaming. Someone on a microphone saying something about the blessing of I don't know what, and I couldn't open the door. I was trembling. If someone back there saw me, I didn't know what could happen. Until, touching the door because I couldn't see anything, I felt it had a latch, and thank God or whoever was accompanying me that day, I was able to open it. I ran out, closed it, walked a few blocks, and took a taxi home. It was 1995. I didn't have a cell phone, just a watch on my wrist, and with that I realized it was already 1 in the morning. How did so much time pass there? I realized this when I left there, that no public transportation was running anymore. I don't know what I looked like, but even the taxi driver asked if I was okay, asking if someone was chasing me. I noticed at that moment that I was breathing heavily, and I told him no, that nothing was wrong, that I had had a very ugly argument with someone. Even for a moment, despite taking that taxi about 3 blocks away from there, I felt like the driver was working with them, though it was just my fear from having left that way. I got home in about 15 minutes. I showered as soon as I arrived. I couldn't get rid of that smell of ammonia and rot. I then checked my clothes and they smelled like that. The whole house smelled like that. Since I felt sick, as soon as I lay down, I fell deeply asleep. The next day, Sunday, I had no school or work, and I called Marcus on the phone. He lived about 10 minutes from my house by bus, and I asked him to come visit me. I didn't want to go out at all. When he heard me, he said he'd come right over. He didn't ask me anything. I waited for him. He arrived quickly, and as soon as he entered, I told him I had gone out with Lisa the night before. I had enough confidence with him to tell him everything directly without having to beat around the bush or watch my words. But what's wrong with you? Don't you remember what I told you about Lisa? I didn't remember until that moment that when Marcus first introduced me to those friends, he had said, "You'll get along great with everyone, even Lisa, but be very careful with her. She's very insistent if she likes someone." We already had problems with her because once, a while ago, she liked a guy from our circle and separated him from all of us. Maybe they had some problem because one day he just didn't come back. He stopped hanging out with us, and when we asked Lisa about that guy we really liked, she said they hadn't understood each other and broke up. But he studied at our school, and we never saw him again either. Who knows what happened between them? I remembered that. I told Marcus he was right, that he had told me, but I didn't know why I had forgotten. He said to me, "Haven't you seen Lisa's forearms?" I said, "No, why should I?" "She has problems, and we understand. How could she not have them? Something similar to what happened to you happened to her, but she still lives with her grandmother. She doesn't have parents anymore. We know her grandmother because there was a time when we were closer to her. She invited us to her house a lot, and once her grandmother told us when Lisa left for a moment. She told us what happened to her parents and said it wasn't an accident. That truck driver who took them like that, it wasn't by chance because her parents held very important positions. They were both federal agents. We've never wanted to ask her why her arms are like that, though we can imagine. Yes, we love her and everything, but if Lisa doesn't tell us, we're not going to interfere. But it's been over a year since the first time we saw that scar on her forearm, a very severe one, made from bottom to top. They weren't just cuts, if you understand me. We waited a while in case she might tell us. It's just that she did distance herself from us a bit. We didn't see her grandmother again, but we know she's still alive. A few months passed, and suddenly we saw Lisa with a guy who seemed to be dating her. No matter how much we asked, she never told us anything about him. She was embarrassed, so she didn't want to introduce him to us. Less than a week passed before we saw her with us again. She was hanging out with the group again and simply told us things hadn't worked out with him. But Louis, the one with the band, he told us once that the guy Lisa was dating, the one we saw her with but never met, was in his class. He didn't talk to him at all, but when we stopped seeing them together, He didn't come back to classes either, just like the other guy. His teachers asked about him, but nobody knew anything. He didn't drop out of school. We can't think that Lisa had ended badly with them, and maybe they were afraid of her parents because of the positions they held, because they had already died long ago. But after we stopped seeing them together, she now had another very large scar on her other arm. No matter how much she hid it, we could notice it. So we didn't know what was happening with them. Michael, where did you go with her? I told him absolutely everything I saw that night, and the face Marcus made worried me a lot. He looked at me scared. We were outside my house talking about this, drinking sodas, but he left his on the ground. He sat down, asked me to sit with him too, and told me, a long time ago, Eric told us he had gone out with Lisa one night. Michael, we didn't believe what he told us. And Eric also seemed to doubt what he was telling us, because none of us believed him when he said he had accompanied Lisa to a place like the one you're describing, also there, behind the cathedral area. He told us exactly that Lisa had taken him to a cult where people ate, other people. That's why we didn't believe him. You look at Lisa and you can't imagine these things. And since Eric joked around a lot, you met him, we thought it was another joke. One night when he got drunk with us, just the guys, he told us that, but it was hard to believe. However, then these things with the guys I'm telling you about happened. Now you're telling me this, and it makes sense. But you know what Eric has? He's not from here. He came from Bend. He's alone in Portland, family-wise. And the fact that you're telling me she took you too gives me the suspicion that she's doing something bad. I swear to you, I haven't told anyone in the group that you live alone. How did they know your name? About your father? You didn't tell Lisa about your family either, did you? I told him no, that I hadn't told anyone that only our group of friends knew, including Marcus, my closest friends. So now I was more worried about this. We had no idea what to do. He just told me not to go anywhere with her anymore, that I should better act like I hadn't seen anything. He asked me for more details about what I saw that night, especially about that figure. I didn't stay the whole night like Eric told me he did. Yes, he did, and he saw that thing. Marcus told me that Eric had indeed told them he had made up an excuse that night not to touch anything they served him, because he also left as soon as he had the opportunity, and that Lisa also acted like nothing had happened. Marcus stayed with me that night. Everything else we talked about, there was nothing new to tell you. They were just questions we asked ourselves, and he understood why I felt afraid to go out. They knew everything about me. I don't know if all those people, or just that man who told me all my information, though the other couple also knew what I was called and about my father. I didn't doubt that Lisa also knew all that. Marcus went to get clothes from his house and returned after a while. We spent the night at mine, and the next day, when I went to work, I left my house keys with Marcus. He was one of my best friends, as I mentioned. I could trust him completely. We met later at school. That afternoon, we agreed not to tell the other kids anything yet. He had known them longer and told me that, just like with Eric, we could tell the others about this, but it was better to wait. I avoided meeting with them that afternoon. I saw Marcus leaving class, and he told me he wouldn't go with them either. Another day passed. I felt calmer not having seen Lisa. The next day at school, Louis, the one with the band, arrived and asked me about Marcus. He had a very strange expression. Something was worrying him because he told me he needed to talk to us, but it had to be all of us together. I told him he was probably in his classroom and wouldn't be long coming out, and he asked if we could wait for him together. I had no problem with that. The person I didn't want to see was Lisa. Marcus came out of his class, and we went to where we always met with the others. When we were all there, except Lisa, Louis told us. Lisa's grandmother called me. She's very serious in the hospital. She's not responding. She didn't allow us to go see her. She didn't tell me which hospital she's in, what happened to her. She just told me she had tried to take her own life and might not survive. We were all quiet. I remembered everything Marcus had told me the day before and started relating what he told me about the scars, the guys she dated, the timing that coincided with those 2 marks on her forearms. Why did she take me there? Why Eric too? Another friend from that group asked Louis what else her grandmother had told him, and he stared at him for a few seconds, then at us, and said, "Her grandmother sounded very bad. She said she couldn't stay here with that news and that she would go with her family to Seattle, that at the hospital they would take very good care of her, that she lacked nothing, and that she didn't know who else to leave this letter with, but she couldn't give it to us until she returned to Seattle, that we should just wait for her." Among all the anguish we lived through for a week of not knowing anything, of not being able to go to Lisa's house because her grandmother asked that no one show up at the house, that it wasn't safe, but she never said why. She never told Louis which hospital she was in. They had many years of friendship with Lisa, which is why they talked so much with her grandmother. When Monday of the following week arrived, we knew Louis would go to her house for the letter, and we would see each other as always after leaving classes. I don't remember what I did at work that week, especially that Monday. I was also worried about my part. I felt like I had done something wrong by leaving that night. I accompanied Lisa to that warehouse, that someone was looking for me, that at any moment they would come to my job, my house, wait for me outside school for I don't know what. When we all met where we always did, Louis was very bad. He was trembling, and when we arrived, he asked me if, just like Eric, Lisa had taken me to the cult. I couldn't hide it from him anymore. I told him yes. He stood up, hugged me very tightly, and told me quietly how good it was that I had returned alive. I started trembling like him when I saw the faces of the others, seeing one of the girls from the group crying, Eric also very scared. And Marcus, he was looking at the others in the group with fear. Louis told us, taking a letter from his backpack, that Lisa was never in any hospital, that her grandmother didn't leave for the reason she told us, that something else had happened to Lisa, that this letter was from her, and it didn't say anything good. The story appears to continue, but this seems to be where the first part ends, as indicated by the narrator's comment that this story doesn't end here. Soon we'll hear the continuation. It was a Thursday night. I remember it clear as day, because the local farmers' market had been bustling in town all afternoon. I'd come back to my farm in rural Montana, bone-tired after hauling feed and supplies. Around 7:30 in the evening, I locked up the pig pen like always, double-checking the padlocks, making sure the hogs had enough slop and water. Everything was in order. The pigs were calm, some already curling up for the night, others snuffling through the last bits of feed. I settled into my old recliner in the living room, half watching my wife's favorite soap opera on the TV, dozing off to the hum of the screen. It must have been close to midnight when a sound ripped me out of my stupor. A scream, not like any hog I'd ever heard. It was raw, tortured, like something was tearing one of my animals apart, slow and deliberate. My wife jolted awake, her eyes wide with panic, asking what the hell was going on. I grabbed the shotgun I keep loaded by the door. Out here, you never know if it's a coyote, a bear, or some drifter trying to steal livestock. Barefoot, I ran out into the chilly night, the gravel biting into my soles. I figured it was a predator, maybe a mountain lion that had slipped down from the hills looking for an easy meal. Happens sometimes when the streams dry up. But when I got to the pig pen, everything was dead quiet. Just the rustle of wind through the cottonwoods and the chirping of crickets. The padlocks were still in place, the gate untouched, no signs of tampering. I flicked on my big flashlight, eased the gate open, and stepped inside, shotgun ready. What I saw froze me to my core. Every single pig, every last one, was lying on its back, legs stiff in the air. Not dead, mind you. They were breathing, chests rising and falling, but they couldn't move. Their little eyes, glinting in the flashlight beam, stared right at me. It wasn't the usual dumb hog stare either. It was sharp, knowing, like they were in on some secret I was. I tried flipping one over, but it was like moving a slab of concrete, heavy and rigid, muscles locked tight. Then I noticed something else. Strange marks in the dirt, like something heavy had dragged itself through, leaving shallow grooves. Not animal tracks, not human footprints, just these weird, uneven scratches, like nothing I'd ever seen. I spent about 20 minutes in there, shining the light around, checking the fences, the walls, the locks. Nothing was broken, nothing out of place. It didn't add up. Those pigs, still staring at me with those eerie eyes, weren't just paralyzed. They were watching, waiting. I couldn't shake the feeling they knew something I didn't, something big. I locked up and stumbled back to the house, too rattled to sleep. Call a vet at midnight to say my pigs were belly up, but alive, staring like they'd seen a ghost. They'd think I'd been hitting the whiskey. By dawn, I was back at the pen, expecting the worst. But the pigs were fine, trotting around, rooting in the mud, acting like nothing had happened. I asked my neighbors, the Millers and the Thompsons, if they'd heard anything strange that night. They all said no, slept like logs. I know what I heard, though. That scream wasn't my imagination. And those pigs, they've been different ever since. Sometimes they stop dead all at once and stare at the same empty corner of the pen like they see something I can't. Every now and then, late at night when it's dead quiet, I hear an echo of that scream, faint but unmistakable. My wife swears it's just the wind, but I know better. The pigs get antsy the next day, like they're waiting for something to come back. Our chickens have always been reliable layers. Every morning, I'd head out to the coop on our small farm in southern Alberta, Canada, and collect 6 or 7 fresh eggs from the nests. Been that way for years, a steady routine. Wake up, brew coffee, feed the animals, grab the eggs. Then out of nowhere, the hens stopped laying. For 2 whole weeks, not a single egg. The nests were empty, spotless. The chickens looked healthy as ever, scratching, clucking, eating their feed, the rooster strutting like he owned the place. No signs of disease or stress, just no eggs. One morning, I noticed something odd. Bits of eggshells scattered across the coop floor, crushed into tiny pieces, like someone, or something, had eaten the eggs right as they were laid. I figured it might be a raccoon or a skunk sneaking in at night. Those critters are crafty around here. So I started waking up at 3 in the morning, keeping watch from my bedroom window with a clear view of the coop. Night after night, nothing. Just the hens roosting quietly, the soft hum of crickets, and the occasional hoot of an owl in the pines. Then one Saturday morning, I woke to a strange sound from the coop, a low, whirring noise, like a tiny gust of wind spinning in one spot near the nests. I grabbed my flashlight, slipped on my boots, and crept out into the pre-dawn chill. As I got closer to the coop's wire fence, I saw it, a small whirlwind, no taller than a toddler, swirling just outside the netting. It wasn't natural, no wind was blowing, and it stayed rooted in one place, kicking up dust and straw. I pushed open the coop door, heart pounding, and checked the nests. In one tucked deep in the straw, I found a tiny red knit cap, no bigger than a child's, smeared with fresh egg yolk, reeking of raw egg. It hit me like a bolt. My grandma used to tell stories about trickster spirits, little folk, she called them, who loved to mess with farmers, stealing food and causing mischief. She said you had to leave an offering to make peace. So I went back to the house, grabbed a pack of rolling tobacco and a bottle of good bourbon from the pantry, and set them under the big maple tree near the coop, a spot Grandma always said was sacred. I felt foolish, but I spoke out loud, respectful-like. "If you're the one taking my eggs, please stop. Take this instead and leave my hens alone." The next morning the nests were full again, 6 fresh eggs, warm to the touch, just like old times. I checked the offering. The tobacco was gone, not a shred left, and the bourbon bottle was half empty, cap still screwed on tight. From then on, the hens laid like clockwork, but I noticed something. If I forgot to leave a pinch of tobacco under the maple now, and then an egg or two would go missing. Not all, just enough to remind me. It's like we struck a deal. 3 years later, it's part of the routine. Sometimes, on windy evenings when the sun's dipping low, I catch a glimpse of that tiny whirlwind spinning near the coop. My 8-year-old grandson, Tommy, saw it once when he was visiting. Got all excited, asking what it was. I told him about the trickster, the offering, the eggs. He was spooked at first, but begged to stay up and see if the red cap would show again. It never did, not since that first time. My wife, Ellen, used to laugh it off as coincidence, but now she's the one reminding me to restock the tobacco. When friends come over, she tells the story with a grin, proud of our tame trickster keeping watch over the coop. The barn out back of our place in rural Nebraska has always been a quiet spot. It's where I store corn from the harvest, old tools I rarely use, and sacks of feed for the animals. It's dim, smells of aged wood and grain, and I only go in when I need something specific. About 6 months ago, though, things changed. Every afternoon around 5:30, I started hearing a laugh coming from inside the barn. Not a loud one, just a soft, muffled giggle, like a kid playing hide-and-seek, having the time of their life. At first, I thought it was some neighbor's kid sneaking in. Barns are like magnets for kids, dark, full of old junk, probably feels like a treasure cave. I tore the place apart one day, checking every corner, moving every sack, looking behind every rusty rake and shovel. Nothing. No kids, no animals, no sign of anything out of place. But the laughing kept up, every day, right on schedule. That same soft, happy giggle, like someone was in on a private joke. I decided to test it. I started scattering handfuls of corn kernels on the barn floor, some by the door, some in the middle, some in the shadowy back corners. If it was an animal, it'd eat and make a mess. If it was a kid, they'd scatter the kernels playing around. Next morning, the corn was gone. Not a single kernel left, no husks, no mess, like someone had picked up each grain with surgical precision. Then I noticed the marks on the dirt floor. Tiny, claw-like prints, not animal paws or human feet, but something like little hands with curved fingers, scooting along in winding trails, like they were searching for every last kernel. It started to creep me out. That giggle wasn't cute anymore. It felt like something was watching me, laughing at my every move. One afternoon, I hid behind the chicken coop, where I had a clear view of the barn door, waiting to catch whoever it was. When the laughing started, I watched, holding my breath. Nothing moved. The door stayed shut, no one came or went, but the giggle was unmistakable, coming from inside. It was like something lived in there, something that didn't need to come or go. I started avoiding the barn alone, especially at dusk. If I needed something, I'd drag my son Jake along. He thought I was being paranoid, said it was probably just the wind rattling the old boards. But one day, he heard it too, clear as day. He tried to brush it off, mumbling about echoes or loose shingles, but I saw the look on his face. He was spooked. My wife, Sarah, had an idea. She's always been a churchgoer, believes in spirits and the like. She thought it might be a restless soul, maybe a child who'd passed and got stuck here, playing in the barn. She suggested saying a prayer before going in. So we started reciting the Lord's Prayer, full and proper, every time we opened the barn door. And you know what? It worked. The laughing dropped off by about 90%. Now it only happens once in a while, usually when someone new, like a cousin visiting from town, goes in without praying first. The barn's almost back to normal, but I still get a chill thinking about those little claw marks, and I make sure everyone knows. No prayer, no entry. When my grandpa Henry got sick, we brought him to live with us on our farm in upstate New York. He was in his early 80s, starting to get confused, his mind slipping. The doctor said it was just old age, his brain getting foggy, mixing things up. So when he started talking about a man standing on the porch every afternoon, we figured it was just his mind playing tricks. Every day, around 4:30, he'd point a shaky finger toward the porch and say, "There's the man. Don't you see him?" "How can you not see him?" We'd look, but all we saw were the creaky rocking chairs, my wife's potted geraniums, and the little table where we drank coffee in the mornings. Grandpa would get agitated, insisting the man was there, staring into the house, watching us. It got tough. He was scared, refused to be alone anywhere in the house. We set up a schedule, me, my wife, our 2 grown kids, taking turns keeping him company so he wouldn't panic, screaming that the man was coming for him. We tried calming him, distracting him with old stories or his favorite radio shows, but he was fixated. "He's getting closer," he'd whisper. We chalked it up to dementia, nothing more. Then one day, I came home early from town, around 5 in the afternoon. The sun was still high, casting long shadows across the yard. I decided to check the porch myself, see if there was anything, a weird reflection, a shadow, that could be messing with Grandpa's head. As I stepped onto the creaky boards, I saw him. A tall, gaunt figure, skin gray as ash, standing stock still at the far end of the porch. He wore a wide-brimmed black hat, tilted low, hiding most of his face. I thought maybe it was a neighbor waiting for us, so I called out, "Hey, you need something?" No response. He didn't even twitch. I walked closer, uneasy, my boots loud on the wood. When I was about 6 feet away, he turned, slow, deliberate, and I saw it. Where a face should have been, there was just a dark, tattered cloth, like an old hood, swaying slightly in the breeze. No eyes, no mouth, nothing, just darkness. My knees buckled. My heart hammered so hard I thought it'd burst. I shut my eyes, telling myself it was the sun, a trick of the light. When I opened them, he was gone, vanished like he'd never been there. I staggered back inside, shaking, sweating like I'd run a mile. Grandpa was in his chair, staring at me with those scared, knowing eyes. "You saw him too, didn't you?" he whispered. "I knew you'd see him eventually. He's here every day, waiting for something." I tried to laugh it off, told him it was just a shadow, but I knew what I'd seen. After that, Grandpa got worse fast. Stopped eating much, couldn't sleep, kept his hands over his face like he was hiding. He'd mutter about the man getting closer, about to come inside and take him somewhere far away. We played his favorite hymns, tried to keep him calm, but nothing worked. He passed 2 weeks later, right at dusk, hands still covering his face, like he was shielding himself from something till his last breath. Since then, I've caught glimpses on the porch, not the same man, but shadows that don't belong. They flicker when there's no wind, moving in ways shadows shouldn't. I don't tell my wife or kids. They'd think I'm losing it, just like we thought Grandpa was. But I know what I saw, and I know he wasn't crazy. "8 years ago, my dad passed away in a way that still haunts me. We were working our small ranch in the dusty plains of New Mexico, just outside Taos, when it happened. He was clearing weeds from the cornfield, his boots crunching through dry grass, when he stepped on a rattlesnake hidden under some dead leaves. It bit him right above the ankle on his right leg. The venom worked fast, too fast. We tried to get him to the hospital in town, but the dirt roads were rough, and by the time we got halfway, he was gone. It was like the life drained out of him in minutes, leaving me staring at his still face in the back of the truck. I was only 22, still green when it came to running the ranch. Dad was the one who knew everything, when to plant, how to tend the cattle, how to haggle at the market. Without him, I felt like a ship without a rudder. But there was no one else to take over, so I stepped up, learning the hard way through trial and error. The first few years were brutal. I planted crops too late, lost a few calves to sickness, and fumbled deals with buyers. But slowly, I got the hang of it. The ranch started to thrive. More cattle, better yields, even some fruit trees I experimented with. I began to feel a spark of pride, thinking Dad would have nodded approvingly if he could see me now. Then one summer evening, something happened that turned my world upside down. I was out in the yard, fixing a fence the cattle had busted through, sweat dripping down my back as the sun dipped low. Out of nowhere, I heard a voice, his voice, my dad's, calling my name, Jack. Jack, with that same mix of impatience and warmth he used when I was a kid, hollering me in for supper. My heart stopped. It was unmistakable, like he was standing right there. I dropped my hammer and ran toward the sound, not thinking, just moving, like a kid chasing his father's call. The voice came from the thick woods behind the ranch, a dense patch of pines and junipers we never touched. I plunged in, branches scratching my arms, thorns catching my jeans. The deeper I went, the farther the voice seemed to drift, always just ahead, calling my name. I pushed through the undergrowth, heart pounding, convinced I'd find him waiting for me. But after 20 minutes of running, the voice stopped. Dead silence, just my ragged breathing and the rustle of leaves in the wind. I looked around and realized I was lost, surrounded by trees and brambles, no sign of the ranch, no landmarks. I shouted for Dad, begging him to show me the way back, but there was nothing, just the echo of my own voice. It took me nearly 2 hours to stumble out of those woods, scratched up, clothes torn, exhausted. The sun was almost gone when I got back to the ranch house. I staggered into the kitchen, desperate for water and something to eat. That's when I froze. On the table was a plate of food, fresh cornbread, beans, a slice of grilled steak, and a side of greens, arranged like someone had set it out for me. My stomach growled, but as I got closer, I saw the plate was empty. Not a crumb, not a smear of sauce, just a clean, polished plate, like someone had eaten it all while I was lost in the woods. I lived alone. No one else was on the ranch. I'd been gone all afternoon. My head spun. Who made the food? Who ate it? Why was Dad's voice calling me into the woods if he wasn't there? I started to wonder if he was trying to tell me something, maybe that he was still here, still hungry. Since that day, I hear his voice every now and then, always from those woods, always with that same impatient, loving tone. I don't follow it anymore. I know I'll just get lost again. Instead, I leave a plate of food out on the table before bed sometimes. By morning, it's always empty, like he came in the night to eat. People in town think I'm losing it, but I know my dad's voice. I've known it since I was born. He's still here, tied to this ranch he loved so much, and I'll keep feeding him as long as he needs me. I had this old mule named Daisy, the best worker on my ranch in southern Alberta, Canada. She hauled water, carried supplies, even helped plow the fields when I needed her to. Gentle as could be, never gave me a lick of trouble. Her saddle was a sturdy piece my grandpa crafted, all leather with intricate stitching, hung on a hook under the barn's overhang every night after work. I'd tie it up tight to keep it safe from the weather. But then, something strange started happening. Every morning when I went to grab the saddle, it was gone. Not misplaced, gone. I'd search the whole ranch, turn over every corner of the barn, check the fields, nothing. At first I thought it was thieves, but why just the saddle? My tools, worth way more, were never touched. It made no sense. I started locking the saddle inside my house, right in my bedroom, thinking that'd stop it. But even then, I'd wake up and find it missing, like someone slipped in while I slept and took only that. This went on for 2 weeks, driving me up the wall. Without the saddle, I couldn't use Daisy, so I was hauling everything on my back, wearing myself out. One day, fed up, I hiked up the hill behind the house, thinking maybe I'd find tracks or some sign of who was doing this. That's when I saw it, my saddle, perched on a gnarled stump at the hill's crest, placed there like it was on display. Around the stump were dried wildflowers, scattered like an offering, and in the middle of the saddle was an old rosary, its beads worn and cracked. It looked ancient, like something you'd find in a museum. Who'd put my saddle up here? Why the flowers, the rosary? I grabbed the saddle and the rosary, feeling uneasy, and brought them back home. I stashed the rosary in a drawer, not sure what to do with it, and hung the saddle back in its usual spot. That night, I decided to catch the culprit. I hid behind a tree with a clear view of the barn, determined to stay up and watch. Around 3 in the morning, Daisy started acting up, braying like she was terrified, pulling at her tether so hard I thought she'd snap it. I stepped out to check on her, and she broke free, bolting toward the hill in a blind panic, faster than I'd ever seen her move. I chased after her, but she vanished into the dark. By morning, she hadn't come back. I hiked up the hill again, calling her name, but what I found stopped me cold. There, on the same stump, was Daisy's hide, her actual hide, stretched out neat and clean, like someone had skinned her with surgical precision. The saddle was back on the stump, polished and gleaming, surrounded by fresh wildflowers. The rosary was there too, looking newer, less worn than before. No blood, no bones, no sign of Daisy herself, just her hide. I couldn't make sense of it. Who did this? How? I never touched that saddle again. I left it there on the hill where it seems to belong. Every so often I check on it, and it's always there, clean, with fresh flowers around it. Sometimes, when the wind howls through the valley, I swear I hear Daisy's hooves climbing that hill, like she's still carrying that saddle to its sacred spot. But when I look, there's nothing, just the wind and the trees. Last summer, a wildfire tore through our valley in northern Arizona, one of the worst I've ever seen. It started small, just a spark in the dry brush, but the wind whipped it into a monster. For 3 days it raged, swallowing acres of pine forest, killing wildlife, and reducing century-old trees to ash. We fought it with everything we had: hoses, shovels, makeshift fire breaks. But it was like trying to stop a tidal wave. It only died down when a rare drizzle rolled in, quenching the last embers. When the smoke cleared, the valley was unrecognizable. Charred trunks stood like skeletons, and the ground was carpeted in ash. The air reeked of burned wood and something worse, like decay that clung to your clothes and followed you home. A few days later, when the ground was cool enough to walk on, I went to survey the damage, hoping to salvage something, anything, from the devastation. As I picked my way through the blackened forest, I heard a voice, clear as day, right beside me. "Why did you let it happen?" It was sharp, angry, almost accusing. I froze, looking around, but there was no one, just me, the ash, and the scorched trees. I figured it was the wind whistling through the ruins, so I kept walking. Then it came again, louder, more desperate. "Why did you let it happen?" My skin prickled. This wasn't the wind. It was a voice, human, raw with pain, coming from everywhere and nowhere. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was imagining things. But then I saw it, a small cross made of bone and twisted vine, lying in the ash. It was impossibly hot to the touch, like it had just come out of a forge, even though the fire had been out for days. I picked it up, wincing as it burned my palm, and the voice screamed, "Why did you let it happen?" It was so close, so anguished, I thought someone was standing right behind me. But I was alone. I ran, clutching the cross, tripping over roots and stumbling through ash until I reached the safety of my truck. My heart was pounding, my mind racing. Who was blaming me? I didn't start the fire, it was lightning, a freak accident. What had I let happen? At home, I locked the cross in a drawer. But every time the wind picks up, I hear that voice again, drifting from the burned valley, asking the same question. Sometimes the cross gets warm in the drawer, glowing faintly through the wood, like it's still burning. I asked around town, trying to find out if anyone died in the fire, if someone was trapped out there. No one knew of any human casualties, just animals, they said. But I know what I heard. Someone's out there, suffering, blaming me for something I can't understand. One day I'll go back to that valley and face that voice. I need to know what I let happen and why they won't let me forget. There's an old cabin off the dirt road near our farm in rural Montana, a crumbling shack everyone avoids. It's been abandoned since Old Man Tucker passed away decades ago, its log walls sagging, the roof half caved in. Folks around here say it's bad luck to go near it, especially after dark. I always thought it was just small-town superstition, the kind of ghost story old-timers tell to scare kids. I'd pass by it on my way to town, thinking it could be fixed up with some work, maybe turned into a hunting cabin. That was before I stopped there one day. It was a scorching July afternoon, the kind where the heat shimmers off the road. I was driving back from town, my truck's AC busted, and I needed a break from the sun. There were no trees for shade, but the cabin was right there, its door hanging open like an invitation. I figured I'd duck inside for a few minutes to cool off. The place was a mess, cobwebs everywhere, the air thick with mildew, but it was cooler than outside. In the middle of the room was an old mattress, stained and sagging, but good enough to rest on. I sat down, leaning back, and that's when I heard it, 3 sharp knocks on the roof. Thud, 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 like someone rapping with their fist. I looked up, thinking maybe a raccoon or a squirrel had gotten up there. Nothing, just silence. I shrugged it off and closed my eyes, figuring I'd nap until the heat died down. But as I drifted off, I felt the mattress shift, like someone had lain down beside me. The weight was real, pressing the springs down, and I swear I felt the warmth of a body next to mine, human warmth, not just the heat of the day. My heart raced. I kept my eyes shut, too scared to look, hoping it was a dream. But the mattress stayed sunken, the warmth stayed close, and the air grew heavy, like it was pressing on my chest. I lay there, frozen, for what felt like hours, feeling that invisible presence beside me. When I finally peeked, there was nothing, just the mattress, still dented like someone was lying there. I bolted out of that cabin, leaving my hat behind, running through the heat until I reached my truck. Now every time I pass that cabin, I see something strange. A white sheet, clean and crisp, hanging on a clothesline by the door. It's always there, swaying in the breeze, even though no one lives there, no one has been seen tending to it. I asked around, and everyone says the same thing. The sheet's always there, but no one knows who puts it up or takes it down. Some say it's Old Man Tucker, still keeping house. Others think it's something else, something that lingers in that cabin, waiting for someone to lie on that mattress again. I don't stop there anymore, no matter how hot it gets. Some places are better left alone. I was staying at an old ranch in rural Saskatchewan, looking after some stray cattle that got loose during a storm. The place was way out in the middle of nowhere, 15 miles from the nearest town, abandoned since its owner passed years back. The barn was still standing, weathered but solid, so I set up camp there, stringing my hammock between 2 sturdy beams. It was quiet during the day, just the hum of crickets and the wind rustling the prairie grass. At night it was even quieter, nothing but the chirp of frogs from a nearby pond and the occasional rustle of a coyote in the distance. It felt peaceful, like a break from the world. The first night I slept like a rock, worn out from rounding up the cattle. But the second night, I woke up to my hammock swaying, slow and steady, like someone was rocking it. I thought it was the wind at first, or maybe a mouse scampering across the ropes. But it kept going, rhythmic, like a mother rocking a cradle. I lay still, eyes closed, trying to ignore it, but then I felt something, a hand on my chest, rough with calluses, stroking gently. My blood ran cold. I opened my eyes a crack, but there was no one there, just the dark barn and the creak of the hammock. The hand kept moving, warm and deliberate, like it was comforting me. It wasn't threatening, but it was real, too real. I could feel the texture of the skin, the weight of the fingers. The swaying got stronger, and then I heard it, a faint voice, a child's voice, singing a lullaby. It was soft, high-pitched, like a little girl trying to soothe someone to sleep. The melody was simple, repetitive, but heavy with sadness, like she was singing through tears. I stayed frozen, pretending to sleep, listening to that voice and feeling that hand until dawn. When morning came, I checked the hammock and found something chilling. Small, delicate handprints pressed into the fabric, like a child S, but deep, as if they'd been pressed with force. My hands are big, calloused from years of work. Those prints weren't mine. I spent the day rattled, wondering who or what was in that barn with me. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave, but curiosity got the better of me. I stayed one more night, lying awake, waiting. Sure enough, the swaying started again. The hand returned, and the lullaby came back, sadder this time, like the girl was grieving. I never saw her, never saw anything, but I felt her presence, protective yet heartbroken. When I took down the hammock the next morning, the handprints were deeper, almost torn through the fabric. I left that day, cattle or no cattle, and took the hammock with me. I keep it in my attic now, and sometimes when kids are over, it sways on its own, like that invisible girl is still there, trying to lull someone to sleep, forever stuck in that lonely barn. I work on a cattle ranch in West Texas, riding the same dirt trails every day to check on the herd. There's a crossroads where two paths split, one to the creek, the other to the hills, where I'd always see something odd. An old piece of leather, brittle from the sun, and a rusty dagger, just lying there in the dust. They'd been there for months, maybe years, like someone dropped them and never came back. I figured it was junk, a lost traveler's gear, maybe, but I never touched it. My mom always said not to mess with things left behind. They might have stories you don't want to know. One evening, after a long day wrangling some ornery steers, I stopped at the crossroads. Curiosity got me, like it always does. I picked up the dagger and leather, tying them to my saddle. The leather had faint carvings, maybe symbols, and the dagger, though rusted, looked well crafted, with a carved handle that hinted at age and value. My wife, Clara, wasn't happy when I brought them home. "Some things are left alone for a reason," she said, but I brushed it off, thinking she was being overly cautious. That night I sat at the kitchen table, cleaning the dagger with sandpaper and oil. As the rust came off, I saw intricate engravings on the blade, strange symbols, and what looked like a name, too worn to read. It felt like something from another time, maybe a cowboy or outlaw's blade. I worked late, past midnight, and left the polished dagger gleaming on the table before bed. Round 3 in the morning, I woke to a sound, heavy footsteps in our bedroom, with a faint clink-clink like spurs jingling. My wife was asleep beside me, the kids in the next room, their soft breathing audible through the thin walls. No one else should have been there. I opened my eyes and nearly screamed. I was standing in the middle of the room, barefoot, holding the dagger, but I hadn't moved. It wasn't me controlling my body. I was awake, aware, but trapped, like a puppet on strings. Clara woke, saw me, and froze. The lamp flickered on, and she said I was speaking in a voice that wasn't mine, deep, gravelly, with an old-timey drawl. It rambled about vengeance, debts to settle, names and places I'd never heard of, like a ghost from a century ago was using me to tell his story. She shook me, crying, but I couldn't respond. My body paced the room, spurs clinking even though I wore no boots, the dagger gripped tight. It went on for hours until dawn, when I snapped back to myself, standing there, confused, with no memory of the night. Clara was done. She said we were leaving if that dagger stayed. She made me take it back to the crossroads that morning. We buried it with the leather in a shallow hole, marked it with a crude wooden cross, and Clara sprinkled holy water from church, praying for peace. We moved soon after to a new town, a new life. But sometimes in my dreams, I'm back in that room, holding the dagger, speaking with that stranger's voice, like some old grudge is still trying to use me to settle its score. Our family's ranch in Nevada has an old well dug by my grandpa back in the day. It's deep, maybe 50 feet, lined with stone and brick, and it gave us the sweetest water you ever tasted, cold, clear, better than any tap. Even in the worst droughts, it never ran dry. My dad kept it in good shape, cleaning it regularly, making sure the cover was secure. But 3 years ago, during a brutal drought, the water level dropped. The well was nearly dry, just a trickle at the bottom, and it started to echo strangely. Any sound you made, shouting, dropping a pebble, came back wrong, muffled, like something down there was swallowing the noise. One Sunday afternoon, I was fixing a fence near the well when I heard it, a scream, faint but unmistakable, coming from inside. It was a woman's voice, desperate, like she was trapped and begging for help. My stomach dropped. I leaned over the edge, listening. The scream kept going, steady and anguished, not an echo of anything I'd done. I thought someone might have fallen in, so I grabbed a rope and a flashlight, ready to climb down. But when I shone the light into the well, there was nothing, just dry dirt, cracked mud, and a few dead leaves. The scream didn't stop, though. It felt deeper than the well itself, like it was coming from under the earth. I ran to tell my family. My wife, Sarah, wanted to call the sheriff, thinking someone might be stuck in a cave or something. My kids were terrified, refusing to go near the back field. My dad, who's seen a lot in his time, shook his head and said old wells can hold onto things, memories maybe, or worse. I called a neighbor, Tom, who knows about strange things. He came over, listened to the screams, and said it wasn't a living person. He'd never heard anything like it, but it wasn't human, not anymore. The screams came every evening, always at sunset, always that same desperate voice. They carried on the wind, reaching the house, making everyone uneasy. Sarah couldn't sleep. The kids hid indoors. It felt like someone was suffering, and we were failing them by doing nothing. I went to old Mrs. Carter, the town historian, who said there was a story about a woman who vanished out here decades ago, maybe tied to our land, but no one knew for sure. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. Following Mrs. Carter's advice, I hired some guys to seal the well. We hauled big stones from a quarry, stacked them tight over the opening, and packed dirt on top. That night, the screams stopped. I thought we were free. But the next morning, I woke to a deafening crash. I ran outside and found the stones blown apart, scattered across the yard like a bomb had gone off. From the open well came a chorus of screams, 10 voices, maybe more, all women, all begging for help. It was louder, angrier, shaking the air until noon, when it stopped abruptly. That was it for us. We sold the ranch for pennies and moved away. The new owner planned to bulldoze it and build a house, but last I heard, the place is abandoned. People say you can still hear those screams after dark, rising from the ground, and feel something tugging at your sleeve, begging for rescue. That well holds something, pain maybe, or a memory that won't let go, and I'm not going back to find out what. There's a shack out on the edge of our town in rural Colorado, tucked at the end of a lonely dirt road. It's been there forever, home to a man named Silas, who's lived alone as long as anyone can remember. I'm 42 now, and he was old when I was a kid, wrinkled, hunched, with deep-set eyes that never met yours. He'd sit outside all day from dawn to dusk, staring at the ground, fiddling with sticks, never speaking, never shopping in town, never going to church. It was like he wasn't part of the world, just a ghost in a worn-out coat. The strangest thing, he never seemed to age. Decades passed, and he looked the same wrinkles, same gray hair, same vacant stare. People whispered about it, said he'd made a deal with something dark to stay alive. My grandma, God rest her, used to say men like that traded something precious to cheat death, and the cost was always steep. No one knew how he survived. No one saw him hunt, garden, or get deliveries. He just was. Then there was the pattern. Every month someone in town died. Not old folks or the sick, healthy people, dropping dead with no explanation. A farmer one month, a teacher the next, always sudden, always without cause. For years, no one connected it to Silas. Death happens, right? But after a while, it was hard to ignore. He sat there, unchanging, while the town buried its own, one by one. Last year, the county decided to run water lines out that way, part of a big infrastructure push. A crew came with heavy equipment, digging trenches near Silas's shack. He didn't move, just sat there, staring at his sticks. I was passing by, curious about the work, when the backhoe hit something hard. The crew stopped, gathered around, and I joined them. What we found chilled me to the bone. A circle of human skeletons, 12 of them, buried neatly, their skulls turned upside down, facing the earth. The bones were clean, arranged with care like a ritual. The crew called the sheriff, the health department, everyone. People crowded around, whispering, but Silas didn't budge. He sat there, unmoved, like he knew those bones were there all along. That night, the workers covered the site and left, planning to return with experts. I couldn't sleep, so I went back at dawn, needing to see it again. What I found was worse. Silas, lying on the unearthed bones, sleeping with a smile, a real smile, something I'd never seen on him. He looked younger, his skin smoother, his hair thicker, like he'd fed on something overnight. The crew arrived, saw him, and froze. No one dared wake him. He slept through the morning, that eerie smile never fading, even as the sun beat down. The sheriff said there was no crime to act on, so they covered the bones again and moved the project elsewhere. A few days later, Silas was gone. No one saw him leave, he just vanished. And the deaths, they stopped. No more unexplained losses, no more healthy folks dropping dead. Whatever held Silas here, it ended that night among those bones. But I still drive by that shack sometimes, and I swear I feel him watching, waiting for something or someone to take his place. I worked as a deputy sheriff in a small town outside Phoenix, Arizona. I won't mention the exact location or names. It doesn't matter, but what I'm about to tell you happened to me and my patrol partner on a night I'll never forget. We worked 12-hour shifts, 3 days on, 2 days off. That particular night, we were on duty during the graveyard shift. It was past 1 in the morning, and we were doing our usual patrol rounds, driving slowly through the quiet streets, making sure everything was peaceful. Just the two of us in the unit, my partner Jake driving, and me riding shotgun, scanning the empty streets. During one of our routes, we found ourselves on Maple Street, which led directly to Riverside Cemetery, the old municipal graveyard that had been there since the 1800s. The place was pitch black except for our headlights cutting through the darkness at the entrance gate. Jake chuckled and called out to me, "Hey man, imagine if we saw some ghost wandering around in there right now." I wish he hadn't said that, because the moment those words left his mouth, we heard screaming. But these weren't the typical wails or moans you'd expect from ghost stories. These were real, desperate screams. A woman's voice, young, crying out for help from somewhere deep inside the cemetery. We went into high alert immediately. Jake pulled the cruiser over to the side. I grabbed the radio and called it in to dispatch. We pulled out our flashlights and, following protocol, drew our weapons too. We didn't know if this was a prank, if someone had broken in, if there was an assault happening. Whatever it was, someone was screaming and screaming for help. The cemetery fence wasn't very high, so we climbed over easily. We followed the voice deeper into the graveyard. "Where are you?" we shouted, and she answered back, "I'm here, please get me out of here." We kept calling out that we were coming, that she was safe now, but she wouldn't stop screaming desperately. "Come quickly, please don't leave me here." The voice, the screams, led us to one of those large family mausoleums, the kind that look like small stone houses where entire families are entombed. This one had a heavy metal door secured with a padlock. I approached and called out, "Are you in there? Can you hear me?" And she answered clearly, "Yes, I'm here. Thank God you came." Her tone had shifted to relief now. Jake always carried a lock-picking kit in his tactical vest, so he got to work on the door. To keep the girl calm and distracted, I started asking her questions. "Hey, how old are you?" 19, she replied. "What's your name?" "Amanda." That was her name, Amanda. She told us she didn't know how she'd gotten there, that everything was very confusing. The girl wasn't screaming anymore. She was speaking in a normal voice, having a real conversation with me. Jake managed to force the lock and push the door open so the girl could come out. But no one came out. Inside, there was no girl at all. We shined our flashlights into every corner, searched every inch of that mausoleum. There was nobody there. "Amanda," I shouted, thinking we'd made some mistake, but she didn't answer anymore. A chill ran through my entire body. It wasn't fear. It was like my body was refusing to believe what my eyes were seeing. We searched behind the door, around the sides. It made no sense, but we did it anyway. We walked back through the cemetery in complete silence, neither of us daring to say much. We got back in the cruiser, but I didn't return to my usual spot. I sat in the passenger seat instead. We kept driving as if nothing had happened. About half an hour passed when Jake finally spoke up. "Dude, the name Amanda was carved on one of the headstones back there." I looked at him. I didn't say anything. And he continued, "She was buried there. The one we talked to, she was already dead." I said nothing. I didn't want to show the fear I was feeling, but inside I was terrified. That's the end of my story. Make of it what you will. My grandmother from Taos, New Mexico, told me about a rancher who lived in their small community back in the 1950s. This man, Samuel Blackwood, was known throughout the area as cruel and vicious. He cheated his workers, beat his animals, and was rumored to have done much worse things that people were too afraid to speak about openly. When Samuel died, some say of a heart attack. Others whisper it was something more sinister. They buried him in the local cemetery on a Tuesday morning. But by Wednesday morning, according to my grandmother, the earth had literally pushed him out. His pine coffin was sitting on top of the grave, as if the ground itself had rejected him. The townspeople thought it was strange, maybe the work of animals or some kind of ground shift. They buried him again, deeper this time, with more dirt packed tight. Thursday morning, there he was again. The coffin had been pushed up and out of the earth, sitting crooked on the surface like an unwanted offering. By now, people were getting scared. Word spread quickly through the small community. Some of the older folks said they'd heard of such things happening to people who had committed unforgivable sins. They buried Samuel Blackwood a third time, but this time they called Father Miguel from the mission church. The priest performed a special blessing over the grave, sprinkled holy water on the earth, and said prayers for hours. That time the earth finally accepted him. My grandmother always said that even the ground knows the difference between good and evil, and sometimes it refuses to hold onto something that dark. Samuel Blackwood's grave is still there in that little cemetery outside Taos. The grass never grows quite right over it, and locals say that even now, 70 years later, nothing will bloom on that spot. Some say the earth remembers everything, and forgiveness isn't always guaranteed, not even in death. Last summer, my family and I traveled from San Diego to visit relatives in a small town outside Guadalajara, Mexico. We stayed at my great-aunt Maria's house for about a week. We already knew about the stories that happen in these rural places. It wasn't anything new to us. But what surprised me during those nights we stayed there was that my great-aunt had this enormous rooster. And every time I got up to use the bathroom at night, that bird would crow. But it wasn't the normal sound a rooster makes. It was a strange, almost haunting call, deeper and more prolonged than any rooster I'd ever heard. I didn't pay much attention at first, but as the days passed, I noticed that every time it struck 1 in the morning, that rooster would start crowing. I heard it because I almost always woke up around that time to use the bathroom, and to get there, I had to walk completely in the dark through the courtyard. One of those nights, I remembered a story my great-aunt had told us years ago about how roosters can sense things that humans can't see. So that night, I hurried to the bathroom and back because the rooster had started its eerie crowing. I don't know what made me look toward the corner where she kept a bunch of potted plants around the house. But there, standing perfectly still like a statue, was a tall man wearing a wide-brimmed hat. My skin crawled with fear, and like lightning, I sprinted back to the bedroom. My parents asked what was wrong, but I couldn't speak. They went outside to look, but there was nobody there, and the rooster had stopped crowing. Since that night, I don't get up at 1 in the morning anymore, and the only thing I know for certain is that I never want to go back to where that rooster lives. But people do say that animals can warn us about things they see that we can't. And now I know it's true. That rooster wasn't just crowing, it was sounding an alarm. And whatever it was warning about, I'm grateful I didn't stay to find out more. This encounter happened 8 years ago, and even today, shivers run down my spine when I think about it. It was a weekend, a seemingly normal, warm, and sunny afternoon. I was home alone. My father was at work, and my mother and sister were out running errands. Back then, I was still in school and had arranged with my friends earlier in the week to play video games. Minecraft was very popular in our friend group at the time, and we still used Skype as our standard communication platform. At the agreed time, I logged in, greeted my friends, and joined one of the popular Minecraft survival servers. We played for about an hour without incident, laughing a lot and having real fun. Then I decided to take a short break to get something from the kitchen. While there, I saw my cat, Patches, sitting by the back door. She wanted to be let in. Patches was a relatively small, dark tabby cat, hence her name, and normally loved being outside. It was a nice surprise that she wanted to spend time with me inside, so I let her in. She followed me to my room. I picked her up and put her on my bed so she could rest. Then I put my headphones back on and continued playing with my friends. From this point on, things got strange. For context, my bed was positioned so it faced the bedroom door, and my desk where I played was against the wall, so I sat with my back to the door. After a few more survival rounds, I noticed that Patches couldn't settle down. On the contrary, she seemed increasingly tense. Her eyes were wide open, pupils dilated, and her gaze was fixed on a specific corner of my room. I frowned, confused, but thought she just wanted to signal that she wanted to go back outside. So I initially ignored her behavior and kept playing. The door was open. If she wanted to leave, she could have. But her behavior became stranger and stranger, so much so that I could barely concentrate on the game anymore. She began pacing back and forth on the bed, first slowly, then faster and faster, until she was finally sprinting wildly across the bed cover. Her eyes got even bigger. Her fur and tail stood up and looked twice as voluminous. My attention was now completely on the cat. A feeling of unease and growing fear spread through me, and that's when I began to feel like I was being watched, as if I was no longer alone in the house. My friends asked if everything was okay since I had suddenly gone quiet. I laughed nervously and explained that Patches was acting weird, while simultaneously trying to convince myself that she was probably just having one of those typical energy bursts that cats sometimes get. But the feeling of being watched and Patch's strange behavior continued to intensify until I couldn't ignore it anymore. Finally, I took off my headphones to calm her down and figure out what had gotten her so worked up. Then the temperature in the room suddenly began to drop. It became unnaturally cold, even though outside in Australia there was blazing heat. And then it happened. Patches jumped off the bed, raced across my room floor, and jumped so high that she almost touched the ceiling. I swear I had never seen an animal jump that high. While she was in the air, she stretched out her paw as if trying to hit something in the corner of the room. Then she flew past me with full force. And then it appeared a dark shadow, gray, translucent, with no lower body. It wasn't standing, it was floating, tall and threatening. It had no recognizable facial features, no face, no eyes, and yet I felt it staring directly at me. Panic, cold, primal fear, and pure terror overwhelmed me. Every hair on my body stood up. I couldn't move. This shadow figure just remained there, motionless, silent, unwavering, staring at me. Seconds felt like hours. Then finally, my flight instinct kicked in. I ran after my cat, through the door, past the now fading dark, cold figure, down the hallway, and into the living room. My heart was pounding like crazy. My hands were shaking. Again and again, I glanced back toward the hallway to see if the thing was following me or reappearing. I grabbed the house phone and dialed my mother and sister's number. While the phone rang, I turned on the TV. I was afraid of the silence. Finally, my mother answered. I frantically asked where they were and if they were coming home soon. She said she had just finished shopping and was now heading home. My sister, who overheard the conversation and heard the obvious terror in my voice, asked what was wrong. I told them everything, Patch's strange behavior, the sudden temperature drop in the room, the feeling of being watched, and finally the appearance of the shadow in broad daylight, in full light. I begged them to come home as quickly as possible while still looking over my shoulder. They were skeptical, but stayed on the phone while they drove back. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw my mother's car pull into the driveway. Only then did I feel safe enough to hang up, relieved that I was no longer alone. I explained everything to them again while processing it myself. I tried to rationalize what I had experienced, but the more I answered their questions, the less sense it all made. Honestly, if I hadn't experienced it myself, I probably wouldn't have believed it either. I would have dismissed it as an optical illusion if it weren't for Patch's reaction. She had seen something even before it showed itself. When my family searched the room, the shadow was gone. Only questions remained. Why had it appeared in the middle of the day? What did it want from me? And how long had it been there before my cat noticed it? I refused to enter my room for the next week, and Patches didn't either. I was simply too afraid that this figure might appear again. And even after all these years, I still look at that same corner of the room with the same fear, the same feeling of dread that this faceless, emotionless being might show itself again. It was only later that I learned the son of the previous owners had also had a strange encounter in exactly this room. He had seen the apparition of an old woman in exactly the same corner, and had also refused to ever enter the room again. Was his encounter related to mine, or was it just a coincidence? We had seen two differently described entities, but in exactly the same location. I'll probably never find out. I'm just glad I wasn't completely alone at that moment, and that Patches saw it too. It was a completely normal Saturday afternoon. I was sitting on the couch watching YouTube videos when suddenly my mom called out, "Your dad's at Grandpa's house, and I need to take your brothers to their soccer games. Keep your phone on, you'll be alone for a while." Then she quickly went to the other room and asked my brothers if they had packed everything. I grinned. I loved being home alone. My brothers were honestly annoying, and my parents were true masters of nagging. This was the only time I really had peace and quiet. Shortly after, I heard the car backing out of the garage, followed by the unmistakable sound of the garage door closing. I made myself comfortable and watched even more YouTube. After a while, I heard light footsteps in my parents' bedroom. I quickly dismissed it as my imagination or a sound from the video and ignored it. But then the footsteps got louder. Slowly, I started getting scared, but I didn't want to get up. I told myself it was probably our dog making the noise, so I just kept watching. But suddenly, it sounded like someone was stomping around in my parents' bedroom. At that moment, I knew I couldn't talk myself out of it anymore. Something was wrong. Expecting the worst, I grabbed a kitchen knife and made my way upstairs to my parents' bedroom. "Hey," I called out loudly, trying to make my voice sound deeper to seem like an adult. "Whoever you are, get out of my house. I've called the police. I'm armed." No response. Adrenaline rushed through my body as I approached the room. I kept telling myself, "I have the knife. I can defend myself if necessary." The sun was just beginning to set, making the hallway on the way to the bedroom even more eerie. I took a deep breath, turned the corner, and looked into the bedroom. At first, I saw nothing, just a dark room and at the far end, the faint light of a digital clock. I breathed a sigh of relief, but too soon. Just as I was about to turn around, I noticed a small movement in the light of the clock, down low. And this movement slowly rose. It looked like someone had decided to slowly stand up in front of the clock. I held my breath as the figure rose above the light, until no light was visible at all. I ran. I stormed into my brother's room and locked the door. Then I called my girlfriend. Before you judge me for not calling the police, I figured the emergency line wouldn't believe me anyway if I said there was a ghost in my house. My girlfriend, on the other hand, had experience with such things. In every house she'd ever lived in, she claimed something supernatural had happened. After 2 rings, she answered. I frantically described what was happening. "Okay, calm down. Let me think," she said. Suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps in the hallway. They were coming directly toward the room I was in. My heart raced. I pleaded on the phone. "Is there anything holy in the room?" she asked. I looked at the wall there hung a cross. The footsteps got louder, closer. I tore the cross from the wall. "Now what?" I asked, panicked. "That should protect you," she said. I hoped she was right. Suddenly, the call broke off. I looked at my phone. It was dead, even though it had 70% battery just 5 minutes before. I heard the footsteps getting closer and closer until they stopped directly in front of the door. I noticed dark smoke or vapor creeping under the door, and I heard heavy breathing. I held my own breath and hoped for the best. Then the smoke disappeared, the footsteps moved away again, and the breathing stopped. It lasted a few minutes, and then it became silent. Shortly after, I heard the garage door open. The car was coming in. I slowly went downstairs to meet my mother, but I didn't tell her anything about it. Even though I haven't seen this entity that terrorized me that day since then, I still have great fear of my parents' bedroom, and I've never been home alone since. Good evening. My name is David. I'm 26 years old, and I'm from Newark, New Jersey. I've been following paranormal stories for about a month now, and I've heard dozens of accounts that remind me of my own experiences. I've been meaning to write down the supernatural encounters I've had since I was 13. There are many. But today, I want to share what happened to me earlier this year in the old apartment where I used to live. I can't recall the exact date, but it was sometime in early February. I woke up that morning with an immediate sense of dread. You know that feeling when something heavy sits on your chest and the air itself feels wrong. That oppressive atmosphere followed me throughout the entire day. Even the weather seemed off overcast, but uncomfortably warm, like the sky was holding its breath. The feeling persisted all day and intensified as evening approached. When bedtime came, I went to my room and followed my usual routine. I turned off my phone and plugged it in to charge overnight. I suffer from severe insomnia and take prescription sleep medication. But even with treatment, it takes hours for me to fall asleep. The upside is that once the medication kicks in, I sleep so deeply that almost nothing can wake me. That night I lay in the darkness thinking about life and that strange, unsettling feeling that had been with me all day. Without realizing it, I drifted off to sleep and had the most vivid dreams, which was unusual, since my medication typically suppresses dream activity. In the dream, I was standing in my bedroom, looking down at my own body lying asleep in bed. Throughout my apartment, there were numerous people standing motionless, like statues. I could see my roommate asleep in his room, my neighbors in their beds, as if I was floating through the building, observing everyone in their vulnerable, sleeping state. I could move freely through my apartment, but I couldn't leave it. Then I saw a woman walking toward my bedroom. I followed her, watching as she entered my room, but when I got there, she had vanished. Suddenly, I felt someone stroking my face and calling my name softly, intimately like a lover would do. The sensation was so real that it woke me up. I opened my eyes, still groggy from the medication, and saw a figure lying next to me in bed. It had feminine features, but it was absolutely horrifying. Its skin was chalk white, not just pale, but the color of plaster or bone. The flesh looked like it was decomposing, with a melting, waxy texture that made my stomach turn. Its eyes were completely black, so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The thing was lying on its side facing me, positioned like a partner would be, appearing to caress my face with one skeletal hand. The moment I fully awakened, I bolted upright and stumbled backward toward my dresser in the darkness. The entity moved with unnatural speed, sliding off the bed and crouching by my bedroom door like some kind of predatory animal, never taking those black eyes off me. At first, I thought I was experiencing sleep paralysis, a side effect I'd heard about. Then I wondered if it was a hallucination from my medication. But everything felt too real, too present. In my panic, I grabbed the glass ashtray from my nightstand and hurled it at the thing. I heard the unmistakable sound of glass striking flesh, not the hollow thud it would have made hitting the wooden door, but the dense impact of hitting something solid and organic. The entity immediately scuttled to the other side of the room, near the foot of my bed. I slowly reached for my phone to use its flashlight, forgetting that I had turned it off. The moment I touched the screen, it spiderwebbed into 1,000 cracks, as if I had hit it with a hammer, even though I had barely grazed it with my fingertip. My only reaction was to flee. I ran to the living room and called my mother, telling her everything that had happened. She said she would pray for me. She's a devout Christian now, though she explored spiritualism in her youth. This wasn't the first time I had encountered this entity, but it was the last. I planned to share the story of our first meeting in another account. After that night, the thing never appeared again. I moved far away from that apartment, and I haven't seen or dreamed about that creature since. This is just one of many supernatural experiences I've had over the years, and I hope to share more of them soon. I believe in the power of sharing these stories. There's something important about bearing witness to the unexplained, even when we can't fully understand it. Hello, everyone. I can't share my real name for privacy reasons, especially since I live in a small town called Cedar Ridge in the mountains of eastern Tennessee, where everyone knows everyone else's business. This all happened during New Year's Eve, going into 2020. At the time, I was living with my mom and stepdad in a house way out from town, and I mean way out. When I'd come home from school, I had to climb up a steep hill and then walk down a long dirt road with thick woods on both sides. During the day, it was beautiful, especially with this massive rock formation that jutted up from the forest like something out of a postcard. But at night, that same road became something from a horror movie. There wasn't a single streetlight for miles. On clear nights, you could at least see by moonlight, but when it was cloudy, you could literally get lost just 20 feet from your own front door. Anyway, back to New Year's Eve. I was at a party in town, trying to impress some girls and generally making a fool of myself. Let's just say I struck out more than a rookie baseball player rejection after rejection, until I was feeling lower than a snake's belly. I headed home around 2 a.m, walking that long dirt road in the dark, feeling sorry for myself. The loneliness and disappointment were eating at me, and when I reached the beginning of the wooded stretch, I completely lost it. I shouted into the darkness, "Devil, if you're real, come get me. Put me out of my misery." The words echoed through the trees, and immediately I regretted saying them. But it was too late. As I started down the dirt road, I caught a smell that made my stomach lurch. The stench of rotting meat, thick and cloying. I knew this road like the back of my hand, and there had been no dead animals when I'd walked to town earlier that evening. I took maybe 5 steps when I heard a crashing sound from the woods to my left, branches snapping, leaves rustling, like something large was moving through the underbrush at high speed. I picked up my pace, but then something emerged from the tree line and planted itself right in the middle of the road ahead of me. When I saw it, my heart nearly stopped. I couldn't believe what I was looking at. The creature stood upright like a man, maybe 6 feet tall, but its head was that of a massive dog or wolf. Its eyes glowed red with pure malice, and its mouth was open in what looked like a mocking grin, revealing rows of sharp teeth that caught what little light filtered through the clouds. I remembered what I had shouted just minutes before, and terror shot through me like electricity. I called out to Jesus and begged for forgiveness, and something strange happened. The beast stopped advancing and just stood there, staring at me with even more hatred than before. We faced each other in that standoff for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Then the thing opened its mouth and spoke in a voice like gravel being poured down a metal chute. "Cursed be, cursed be." It repeated those words twice. then turned and crashed back into the woods at impossible speed, leaving me alone on that dark road, with the smell of death still hanging in the air. I ran the rest of the way home, not daring to look back. I burst through the front door, locked it behind me, and went straight to my room where I lay awake the entire night, still in my clothes, thinking about the power of words. That experience taught me that we should never speak carelessly into the darkness. There are forces in this world that listen, and sometimes they answer. The Bible says that those who control their tongue are considered wise, and now I understand why. I've never told this story to anyone in my town. They'd think I was crazy or drunk. But I know what I saw, and I know what I said. Some calls shouldn't be made, because you never know what might answer. Since that night, I've been a lot more careful about what I ask for, because sometimes, just sometimes, you might get it. It's been 15 years since I last spoke of this to anyone. Not my mom, not my siblings, and definitely not my kids. Some things you bury deep because speaking them aloud might cost you respect, or worse, your sanity. This happened back in the spring of 2000, when I was 13, in a small town called Willow Creek, tucked away in rural New Mexico. My great-grandmother lived there, in a place where the air smelled of pine and campfire smoke, where low adobe houses lined dusty dirt roads. Every Easter, we'd visit Willow Creek for Holy Week. It was a quiet town, the kind where kids could run wild, climb cottonwood trees, and eat fresh-baked cornbread from the local bakery. But that year, something shifted. We arrived on Wednesday, everything normal, hugs from family, a feast of green chili enchiladas, helping my aunt sweep the backyard for the Sunday procession. But by Thursday night, the air felt heavier, like the silence was pressing down on us, watching from the shadows. Friday night, around 10, I was asleep in the back room when a noise jolted me awake. Thud, thud, like something heavy was smacking the tin roof above. I figured it was branches from the big cottonwood in the yard, its dry limbs scraping in the wind. The sound went on for minutes, irregular but persistent, until sleep pulled me under again. Around 2 in the morning, I woke up needing the bathroom. The outhouse was across the yard, maybe 30 feet from the house, through the chilly desert night. I opened the door, and the cold stung my face. As I shuffled across the dirt, a piercing screech tore through the air above me, a human scream, but muffled, like it was trapped in someone's throat. Then came a loud flapping, like giant wings beating the air, followed by a voice, low and guttural. "What are you doing out there? Get over here, kid." It was my uncle, his voice urgent, yanking me into his room. My aunt was there, clutching a rosary, whispering prayers. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my heart racing. My uncle just nodded, his eyes wide with fear. We crept to the window. The moon hung high, huge, bathing the yard in silver light. "Look at the tree," he whispered. I scanned the cottonwood, my gaze climbing the branches until I saw it. Perched on the highest limb was an owl, but not like any owl I'd ever seen. It was massive, its round, glowing eyes locked on us, its beak sharp and cruel. But its legs, God, its legs were human. Thin, hairy like a man-s, with long, knotted feet. And its head, it had hair, long and black, streaming down like a woman-s. The thing moved with a sickening clumsiness, hopping along the branch before leaping into the yard, its enormous wings spreading wide. My uncle pulled me to the floor, and we lay there silent, as the creature's footsteps crunched across the dirt. It prowled the yard, then darted toward the chicken coop. The hens screamed, a chaotic clatter, then silence. "What was that thing?" I whispered, trembling. My uncle's face was pale. "There's an old woman," he said, "lives out by the mesa. Folks say she's been old since my grandpa was a kid. Never ages. They find dead chickens, coyotes, even dogs near her place, but she's got no livestock." I was too stunned to speak. My uncle had to escort me to the bathroom after that, and I didn't sleep alone for the rest of the trip. The next morning, no one mentioned it, but the coop told the story. 7 hens gone, a trail of feathers leading into the desert. Saturday night was worse. Around 3 in the morning, a scream woke us, not from the yard, but from my great-grandmother's room. We rushed in, expecting a nightmare. But she was standing by her window, muttering in Navajo, words even my aunt couldn't fully understand. Her eyes were wide, her face ghostly pale. When we calmed her down, she told us her dream. An owl with human legs crept into her room, not flying but walking, its grotesque feet scraping the floor. It sat at the foot of her bed, staring as if it knew her. When she woke, it was still there, peering through the window. Her feet were caked in dry desert dirt, though she hadn't left her bed. "It's that witch," she whispered. "She wants something from me." We left Willow Creek early that Sunday, my parents tight-lipped about why. Years passed, and the town changed: strip malls, paved roads, cell towers. But a few years ago, my uncle messaged me on Facebook. "Remember that owl with human legs?" I didn't reply, but his next message chilled me. That old woman's still alive, still in the same house, 26 years later. I left it on read. Even now, the memory of that owl, its human legs, its long black hair, makes my skin crawl. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.